I let out a frustrated huff. Okay, I declared. I've been getting weird vibes from people since I got here. What is it? Has my face really changed that much? Bobby squinted. It's just that, he intoned, his gaze falling to the floor. It's just that, I thought you were dead. No friggin' way, I cried. Where do you get a dumb idea like that? Bobby shook his head. I don't know, I just thought. He shrugged. I mean, everyone kind of assumed. I cut him off. Well, as you can see. I snapped, stretching out my arms. I'm not dead. Sure, bro, Bobby said. He stood stock still for a second, then patted my shoulder. Take care, okay? I watched Bobby shuffle away. This was messed up. Dead? Me? Where'd such a stupid rumor come from? My mouth went dry. I made my way to the refreshment table and ladled some red punch into a plastic cup. I gulped the punch greedily, relieved as the sugary drink coated my throat. I looked up. Dead ahead of me, on the wall, were a series of poster-sized photos, blow-ups of various students' yearbook photos. I studied the picture of a familiar Latina, her hazel eyes alive with fire. Her face exuded ambition, like she was eager to take on the world. There was a placard posted beneath the picture, most likely to succeed. It read, which had been her superlative in our class yearbook. I nodded. I remembered Trini Lopez, how driven she'd been, and how frighteningly smart. I vaguely recalled seeing a newspaper article about her a few years back. She was now an attorney at the Federal Communications Commission, or something prestigious like that. My eyes roved down the line of pictures and placards. Our class jock had been dubbed most likely to win a gold medal. Our class clown? He'd been most likely to host Saturday Night Live. And so on. Until, at the far end of the wall was my photo. I squinted to read the placard beneath it. Most likely to die first. What the hell? I gasped. But then I cracked into a grin. No wonder everyone thought I'd died. Someone saw my photo with the stupid placard, thought it was true, and spread the moronic rumor. Mystery solved. My relief was only momentary, though, because, yes, we'd voted for a most likely to die first. For our yearbook, it had been a joke. A bit of teenage gallows humor. But I knew the unlucky student we'd chosen had been someone else. Not me. I racked my brain for a name. Who'd it been? Who was our most likely to die first? A smile crept to my face as the image of a chunky, happy-go-lucky kid surfaced in my thoughts. Brad Barman. He'd been the kid who'd taught me to use a beer bong. The parties at his house were legendary, bacchanalia popping with teenage sound and fury. In retrospect, it was amazing that we'd survived the parties he hosted without getting arrested, or worse. Just then, a raven-haired, serious-eyed young woman approached the punch bowl. I recognized her in an instant. Jessica Rosenbaum. Our class secretary. She'd been the one who'd organized our reunion. Jessica, I said, tapping her on the shoulder. She darted around, spooked. Once again, I found myself on the receiving end of an unnerving stare. I ignored it. I pointed to my picture. Jessica, what's up with this? Why do you have my picture above most likely to die first? Jessica kept staring. I pressed on. Most likely to die first was Brad Barman. Remember? Bewilderment seized Jessica's face. Who? My frustration boiled over. Oh, come on, I cried. The joke's over. Brad Barman. You have to remember him. His parents were never home. We went to his house for keg parties. We called him Last Call Barman. How could you forget? Jessica stepped back, intimidated by my onslaught. I don't know, she muttered, then slinked away. I hurled my empty cup into the trash. I'd had enough of this scene. I was going home. I was driving too fast. But I didn't care. My hands clenched the steering wheel as the car zoomed along the shadowy road. I took one deep breath after another, in an effort to calm myself down. I thought about my wife's mantra, always look for the funny side of life. But what was so damned funny about a room full of people thinking you were dead? Then an anecdote sprang to my thoughts. I'd majored in English in college, and one of my favorite writers was the humorist Mark Twain. Once upon a time, newspapers got false word that Twain had died, and promptly printed the story. But one amused journalist, who knew that the rumor was false, reached out to Twain for comment. I've heard on good authority that I'm dead. Twain had deadpanned, but rumors of my death are greatly exaggerated. Greatly exaggerated, I hooted. Twain's raw wit boosted my mood. As it always did, I decided that, when I got home, I'd tell Jennifer about how I died at my reunion, then ask her if it was too late to take out a life insurance policy on me. Laughter overcame me. Maybe I laughed too hard, because just then I felt a headache coming on. I spotted a mini-mart and decided to take a break. I parked my car and entered the store. I scooped up a Gatorade and travel pack of Tylenol, then stepped up to the front. The cashier, a sleepy-eyed young man wearing a blue shirt and jeans, studied me. His name tag read, Chad. "You okay, man?" Chad asked. "You look a bit pale." I snickered. "It's been a long night," I explained. "A weird, long night, I'll bet," Chad replied and rang me up. Outside, I washed down a couple of the Tylenols with Gatorade and got back into my car. The headache went away as I drove the rest of the way to my house. Home sweet home. I inched my car into the driveway and killed the engine. I walked toward my house slowly, contemplating how I'd tell Jennifer about my surreal evening. Our mailbox stood atop a pole by the sidewalk. I noticed that its flag was still up. As usual, my wife had neglected to take in the day's mail. With a sigh, I sauntered over to it, opened it, and drew out the mail. I leafed through the letters and bills as I paced toward the house. I froze. The mail. It was all addressed to Brad Barman. A shiver sparked through me. I looked up at my house. A woman peered out of the front window. She looked baffled. It wasn't Jennifer. Numbly, I staggered back to my car and drove away. My thoughts a blurred jumble. I don't know what to do. I'm sitting in the parking lot of a pancake house. I've been here for the last 2 hours. I've sent out texts to all my contacts, but so far, no one's replied. That's why I'm posting this. I need help. I'm leaving my phone number at the end of this post. If someone, anyone, went to Hall High School 10 years ago and remembers me, please call me. My name is Mike Collins, and I'm not dead. My name is Anthony Perkins. If that name sounds familiar, then you've likely seen my videos on TikTok and the like where I review toys and video games with my mom and dad. Don't try to look them up, nor expect me to tell you the channel name. I'll explain that later. I was born on January 20th, 2012. I was the third child out of 4. But I wasn't born normal. I was born with a club foot, a cleft lip, and a skull deformation that makes my head both too large and rather flat. And my eyes bulge from my sockets much like a bullfrog. My older siblings, Kaylee and Jonathan, were born normal, leaving me to be the sad freak. Because of this, I was always the center of attention. My mom coddled me as much as she could, even taking videos of me doing whatever babies do to make sure I felt part of the family. Sibling rivalry, I'm sure you could imagine, was a bit of an issue growing up. Well, Kaylee was grown enough to understand more so than my brother. I feel like John hated me for even existing for a while. But things eventually patch as you get older. Things weren't much better in public though. Everywhere we went, strangers gave me looks that ranged from utter disgust to sorrow. I always felt judging eyes on me, like my very existence was a sin, and that I should never have been here. Being at school didn't help, being that my brain was affected by the deformations of my skull. It made learning difficult. I was always in special needs classes. That didn't keep me from being the target of laughter by me peers. Kids pointed and laughed. Some pretended to vomit when I would walk in the hallway. But now, do I wish it was just that? For at least my family was whole and loved me. Not long after my 5th birthday, in the spring of 2017, my mother gave birth to my younger brother, Edward. However, neither me nor my siblings got to meet Edward. Eavesdropping my parents, I learned that he was born with much of his skull undeveloped, and being born with his entire brain exposed. He would die 2 days later. My family was heartbroken. It didn't help that a lot of the toys my parents bought for Edward remained untouched, sitting as a constant reminder. That changed close to the summer, and so would all of our lives. My mother, who coped with the loss by watching videos of children playing on YouTube, came across a channel with 10 million subscribers where the son in the videos opened and reviewed toys and other such content. That night, my mom and dad got some small production equipment and talked to my siblings about starting a similar YouTube channel. To kickstart the channel, my mom uploaded the home movies that she and my dad had on hand. They figured that I should be the star of the channel, believing that the popularity would help me feel better about my disabilities. Then we uploaded the first video. My mom had me open and review the toys originally meant for my brother, Edward. Popularity was slow, but within a year, the channel took off. We had received 500,000 subscribers in less than 10 months. And as the channel grew, so did the brand deals. My mom and dad received toys from well-known corporations nationally and internationally. The Japanese and Korean toys were always a favorite of mine. Subscriber numbers grew and grew. We were living more well off than we thought possible. My dad was able to keep secure when he was laid off in the autumn of 2018. As much as I liked having a positive experience with my family and playing with all the toys I got, things were starting to get uncomfortable. Every time we had family over or we went over someone's house, all anyone would ever want to talk about was the channel. All my cousins could talk about was how cool it must have been to have toys dropped off to me and play for a living. I mean, it was. But I'd always feel like I was losing myself to this on-camera reviewer version of me. But my parents always supported me, and I didn't see anything truly bad about the situation. That was until the school year of 2019. When I was supposed to return to school, my mom had decided to keep me home from school. "You're doing so well with this review channel that you don't need to return to school," was my mom's reasoning. My dad thought that my mom was going too far with this channel thing, and that maybe we should slow it down for my education. He doesn't need public schooling. Besides, Kaylee's taking a gap year before returning to college. She can teach him. I wasn't opposed to Kaylee teaching me, but it seemed like my mom forced this on her rather than her volunteering to it. But between reviewing toys and video games, my sister tutored me with a beaming smile on her face. Then comes March 2020. What was supposed to be 2 weeks off for everyone in the country turned into total quarantine, with no one being allowed to go anywhere. My mom cranked out the videos. To be honest, at this point, I was growing bored with the reviews. I was enamored with the books my sister had been tutoring me with. When I told my mom this, and that maybe I would want to be a writer when I grow up, she was less than enthused. "You are not mentally capable enough to do something so complex with your life. These reviews are what you're best at. Stick with them." If that wasn't bad enough, I overheard my mom scolding my sister for putting unrealistic ideas in my head. I didn't see my sister for a week. My mom made sure to keep me from her with the video reviews. And with her creating another channel on TikTok, the videos only became more frequent. When I did manage to catch a glimpse of my poor sister, she had a bruise along her cheek. She wouldn't even look at me. I was given the same look I used to get by people when I was younger. Utter disgust. Things only got worse the following year when my sister left for university. With one person less to take care of, my mom filled up the space with the channel. She made me review toys I wouldn't even be interested in. And when I would object, she would damage or throw away anything I actually liked playing with. Every night, I would hear mom and dad bicker. Sometimes argument ended with glass being thrown and chairs knocked over. It wasn't long before my parents divorced. My mom made sure my dad got nothing, and that we weren't allowed to see him. I felt especially bad for Jonathan. Besides always being left alone, the fighting and the divorce only ate at him more and more. Even before dad left, my brother was growing more irate with each passing day. Sometimes awful smells would come from the inside of his room. I snuck inside his room one day while he was at school, and I found a drawer by his bed filled with needles and burnt spoons. December 12, 2022. My brother was skin and bone. His hair was falling out, his teeth crooked, his arms scarred and pocked. My mom was out grocery shopping, and I wanted to talk to my brother about what I found. "It's none of your fucking business what's in there," he yelled at me. "Why do you care? You gonna tell mom about it? Go ahead. She doesn't give a shit. Ever since she started that goddamn YouTube channel, she's ignored this family. If you hadn't been born." He stopped there before slamming the door in my face. I don't know if he stopped because he really couldn't stand looking at me, or if he felt bad for blaming me, but I never found out. The paramedics arrived the next day and took him away. It was only 6 months ago that my mom finally ran out of content to make. She spends more time going out looking for new toys for me to review than she's been home for the longest time. Thankfully, I still have the school books Kaylee left behind when she went to college. It felt good to read, write, do math, learn science. I finally felt like a real kid when I immersed myself in these books. Until my mom found out, thinking she'd found a new source of content. Look at my little scholar. What are you reading, buddy? Let's give you a hard question. What's 5 times 5? My mother asked me with the camera pointed in my face. It's 25, Mom. She sighed and asked me, can't you just say something funny like 13 or 55? It'll make for great content. She just couldn't get the camera away from me. Not for the first time, but definitely the most intense. I've asked myself, does my mom even really love me? Am I just a content farm for her? If I demanded she stop this content, would she just leave me behind? Things came to blows 2 hours ago when I confronted her for throwing out the books Kaylee left. Because this is useless to you. Look at you, Anthony. Do you really think you can understand this? Do you really think of me as some moron? I finally asked her, do you only see me as an advertisement than a son? My mom got that look of utter disgust on her face. I am doing this for you. Everything from the start was for you. Why are you being so obnoxious? All you need to do is say stupid things about these toys and we make a lot of money. I know your head is broken, but how can you not see that? So it was true. My mom only sees me as a moneymaker. She no longer looked at me like a child, just a prop for the camera. Is this really about me? Ever since Edward died, you've pushed everyone away from you. For me, I don't want to do these stupid videos anymore. I hate you. My mom slapped me across the face and stormed out of the house, leaving me alone in pain and totally rejection. I was in my head thinking about how little my mom thinks of me when the train of thought was broken by a buzzing. My mom's phone. She left it here. I picked up the phone and checked it. There was a message, and it was from Kaylee. How could you throw out those books? The message was cut off. I opened my mom's phone and checked her messages in full. There were a lot of messages. From my dad, Kaylee, Jonathan. I decided to check on the message from Kaylee first. How could you throw out those books? I left them for Anthony. He needs real structure. Kaylee, still thought of me? I scrolled up the messages. They were all of Kaylee asking how I was. She was criticizing my mom for not letting me have a normal childhood. I checked the messages from my brother. Similar messages. Even messages about him being addicted to drugs and wanting to get clean. Well, if you weren't such a loser, then you wouldn't need them. Stop trying to take attention from your brother. How could she say that to him? Of course he lashed out at me. I took all the attention away from my family. All because of this damn channel. Then finally, I checked the messages from my dad. Just awful messages about how he was a terrible person. And even lied to him about how we didn't miss him. I would live with my father if he wasn't across the country. Then finally, I checked the comment for the videos. Near millions of comments drooling over my mom's abuse. Losers who watched a child review things against their will. Even all the comments saying things like, "Aw, how cute," mean nothing to me. Liars just trying to feel better about themselves. If they knew what actually happened, they'd say I should rather have never been born. All my life has come to is being used for money. And my family's lives have been torn apart from it. No more. I'm going to end this cycle of abuse. I changed the passwords to my mom's accounts and deleted the videos. I'm going to destroy this legacy like it destroyed us. I'm currently writing this from my mom's phone in my bedroom. Next to me is my mom's handgun that she kept in the bedroom after my dad left. To my mom, I hate you. You've ruined this family and I'm not letting you push me around anymore. To my dad, if you're reading this, I wish we were together with you. And only you. To Kaylee, thank you for trying to provide me a normal childhood. I wish I could see you before I go. To Jonathan, I'm sorry mom's devotion to the channel pushed you away. And Edward, I'm sorry I never got to meet you. But I'm glad you didn't see what happened to our family. I'll see you both soon. This has been Anthony Perkins, and this is the last will and testament to a camera pet. Well, I am death. None can excel. I'll open the door to heaven or hell. Ralph Stanley. O death. From, O brother, where art thou? November is a month that shows us what comes after change. Gone are the colorful leaves and spooky celebrations of October. Gone are the cornstalks and beans from farmers' fields. And pumpkins too. What remains? Bare branches, brown grass, and a perpetual chill in the air. Not yet icy. Gratefulness. 2. For what has come before, and what might come afterward. Remember me? I'm Tenet, a writer for a horror magazine called Mundi Macabre. I recently submitted a story about Sophie Taffis, the owner of a shop called Cinderella's Curios. I revealed the dark secrets of her past and brought them into the present. In the process, I also wrote about the curator. He collects souls, spirits, whatever is inside us that makes us unique. Ourselves. He comes for us when the time is right. And we must go with him. Sophie didn't, or she hasn't yet. She's looking for someone to take her place. Guess who? Supposedly, out of the kindness of her heart. She gave me a discounted watch for my birthday. All it cost was $50 and my blood, drawn every hour for 12 hours. In exchange, talent flowed through my veins instead of the hardening of one's creative arteries known as writer's block. I finished my tale with 5 minutes to spare before the watch's hour hand struck 12. What did I do the next day? Try again, of course. My editor thought Sophie's Collections was a hit, worthy of headlining the Halloween issue of M. Second place, in her opinion, went to a Lovecraftian yarn called The Innsmouth Look. Third place went to It Has Wings, a tragedy from the first-person perspective of a cryptid. Hated and hunted, it sought refuge in a nearly impenetrable forest. However, greedy paranormal investigators found it, fatally wounded it, and cut off its leathery wings as a trophy. The beast bled out and, with its last breath, forgave its killers. That story made me cry. As psyched as I was about my victory, I was also worried about my new addictions. Success is a drug like cocaine or a dopamine hit from social media. The more you have, the more you crave. I craved energy drinks, high ratings, and more talent. I had to shed more blood? So be it. I figured that would save me instead of luck. That and my fast typing fingers. When you earn your salvation by the hour, however, your time will run out. I had no idea how soon. After not pushing the fateful button on my even more fateful watch for a couple of days, I was ready to get back to work. Upon finishing, we chose hell. A confession from someone in the fourth circle. I had trouble deciding what to write next. One of MM's readers liked the curator and wanted to know more about him. They said so on our website, and that comment got several likes. I hesitated. What more could I write about death that hadn't already been said? I could have had him take Sophie, but I didn't want her to go. She said that we were too much alike. That's why I'd forgiven her for not telling me about the watch's real function or our mutual benefactor. I also knew that it wasn't her time to accompany him. It was mine. On Halloween, I got up early and started catering to an appetite about a member of a cannibalistic cult who endures their highest ritual. I won't repeat it here. It's too long, with my having written it in 12 hours. It was both my masterpiece and my undoing. My fingers flew over the keyboard like never before, churning out words and sentences that sounded just right. None of them were clunky or awkward. And I made 0 typos. None. Zilch. Nada. That was a miracle in and of itself. But even more amazing was how well the story flowed from the beginning to the middle. What about the end, you ask? I never got there. You see, the process of being consumed by 12 other people takes a while, especially if they want to ensure their entree stays alive for as long as possible. As for the one being eaten, they know they're getting nearer to transcendence with every bite taken. They also know they're becoming part of their fellow members' bodies, which bestows a form of immortality upon them. The ritual guarantees some form of peaceful consciousness on the other side of the dinner platter. I'd reached the high point of the feast when I felt the sharpest pain in my wrist that I'd ever experienced. I looked at my watch, and terror filled me. The hour hand pointed straight upward. Greetings, Tenet. It couldn't be. It simply couldn't. Yet here he was, the curator in his fragile earthly form. Hiding an eternal one. You can't be here. Please. Not yet. I cried. I sensed my visitor smiling, though he had no mouth. A familiar refrain. It's too soon. For you. But not for me. I'm almost done. Just give me 5 more minutes. And then, you are nowhere near finished. You've only reached the climax of your tale. That's just it. I have to see how it all plays out. To see it through to the end. As you have done many times before. With my help. But your time is up. I thought I heard the distant chime of a grandfather clock. Cinderella's clock. Can't you take Sophie Taffis instead? The curator made a low sound resembling a chuckle. Sophie mentioned you. Take Tenet, she said. Without a moment's hesitation, I'm granting her request. But not mine? How? Why? Because you entered into a deal with me. Time in exchange for talent. Blood in exchange for time. So far, you've kept up your end. But you must still do so. Sophie and I have had our encounters at the crossroads. Her debts are paid. Yours is not. You bargain day by day. And today you did not uphold your part. I choke up. I tried. As always. Many have tried and been less successful than you. Be grateful for favors large and small. I gave you what you wanted. Now, I'm not even dead. I blurted those words before I realized the curator could fix that little problem. That presents an interesting dilemma for both of us. You see, I've guided countless spirits to and through the afterlife. I've never done that with any living being. When you come with me, you'll come in body, soul, and spirit through the realms I frequent. There are lessons you must learn before your proper time. Isn't this it? Do you want it to be? No. Then take my hand. Does yours have any open wounds? I shook my head. He stretched out his palm, revealing 6 fingers with long, pointed nails. His flesh was ashen gray and finely wrinkled. Can I at least turn my computer off? The curator inclined his formless head. His bluish-white eyes narrowed. I dashed over to my laptop and brought up Microsoft Word, which I'd minimized. The last paragraph of Catering to an Appetite stared me in the face. The feast was nearly concluded. All that remained was the division and consumption of my beating heart. My 12 brothers and sisters licked their bloodied lips in brute desire. Yet I felt something far greater, love for them and empathy for their compulsions. I knew them as intimately as I knew myself. Someday, one or more would undergo this same ritual. Would they be as brave and willing to be sacrificed? Perhaps that was the ultimate test. The point of the order of all flesh. Give what you have while you've still been given time. I hit enter, punched the caps lock key, and typed the end. It's too late. The curator gestured to my blood-infused watch, which was actually his. 12:10. Come with me. I must impose a penalty for your little trick. He grabbed my hand and pricked my palm with one of his serpentine nails. It only hurt for a fraction of a second before glacial ice filled me from the inside out. My guts froze within my rigid body, and goosebumps broke out all over me. The curator let go as soon as this sensation reached my head, giving me a massive brain freeze. Now you know how I feel. Every minute of every hour of every day. Eternity is a cold, dark thing. My lips were chapped. I knew they'd be blue if I looked in a mirror. Please release me. I cannot. I am as bound by our pact as you. We must leave immediately. And go where? To Gateway Travel, where I first learned how to guide mortals. The curator offered his hand. Against my better judgment, I took it. If my time on Earth was up, I didn't want to risk further punishment. The cozy confines of my studio apartment vanished. In their place, the brochure-decorated walls of a travel agency surrounded us. All of the offices and cubicles were empty, though it seems deserted. Indeed, Mr. Plutus, the owner, has returned home and won't be back until further notice. He took all his employees with him. I used to work here. Plutus made me quite the offer until I found a better one. I gasped. Hades runs this place? No, that's Pluto. Plutus is the mythological god of wealth. Travel costs money, not for him, or you. Good, you're beginning to understand me and my kind. He took down a brochure on the far wall, depicting a sunny meadow with a brook flowing through it and a cottage beside it. As beautiful as the image was, I couldn't quite believe it. It had probably been airbrushed. This isn't your idea of paradise? It's gorgeous, but it looks too good to be true. Perhaps somewhere closer to home would suit you. The curator led me to one of the cubicles. Unlike the others, it lacked decor, no brochures, post-it notes, calendars, or snapshots of loved ones. It occurred to me that, once upon a time, this had been his workspace. The desk was clear. He reached into the pocket of his trench coat and brought out a set of keys. He inserted one into the middle desk drawer and opened it. Several photos were inside. The top one made me cry out. My grandma's house stood tall and proud as it had been in my youth, instead of rotting and decrepit like it was now. Touch the picture, the curator said, and we'll go there. My palm shot out and slapped the photograph's glossy surface. I pressed down hard and shut my eyes tight. hoping against hope that his promise was true. When I opened them, I found myself in a heaven I could relate to. Grandma was seated in her favorite recliner. Below a sampler that read, "Worry is like a rocking chair. It keeps you busy but gets you nowhere." She wasn't worried anymore. She beamed at me like it was Christmas morning. I dashed forward with my arms out to hug her. They passed right through her. "Alas," said the curator, "only her spirit is present. Her flesh is long gone. But it's okay, honey." Grandma folded her transparent hands in her transparent lap. "I'm here with you in the only form that matters." "But why are you here?" "It's a long story." I pause. Do you know my companion?" Said Grandma. "He took me in 1999. I remember like it was yesterday. I was in a hospital bed for so long. And then everything went dark. Dark and cold. I awoke to see the Savior. And he's brought me back here so I could see you. I knew you'd be here. I just didn't know when, or that you'd still be alive." Despite myself, I have to laugh. Me neither. Suddenly the doorbell rings. "Could you get that, please?" Grandma asks. I open the door to find my 3 aunts. My cousin who died of lung cancer. And my other grandma. My grandpas, too. One whom I'd known and loved and one who died 4 years before I was born. Hot tears roll down my cheeks. I know they won't be able to feel my hugs. However, they realize I love them just the same. I beckon their spirits into the house with open arms. "Welcome, welcome." Grandma stands to greet them. "Let us celebrate the arrival of one whom we love very much. She's come to see us after all this time." One of my aunts looks puzzled. "Wait a minute, she's not, shush. The important thing is that she's with us for however long he allows." Grandma nods toward the curator. My late relatives give a collective shudder. "He's taken all of us. But she still has a chance to learn before she passes on." "Learn what?" I ask. My cousin floats forward. "Life is so precious. No matter how hard it may be. I know you face lots of obstacles at work and home. But you can meet them. You've been doing that every day. I'm so proud of you." "We all are." "I second that," says my unfamiliar grandpa. "When I heard you were coming, I couldn't get here fast enough. You're one of the best things that ever happened to my son. He loves you more than life itself. I wish I could have met you." "Likewise. I've heard lots of stories about you. Some funny, some sad, all good. We spend many a wonderful minute laughing, chatting, and catching up." Grandma tells me about heaven proper, with singing angels and joyous souls praising God. My familiar grandpa mentions all the conveniences of earth up there, even the telephone poles he used to climb. My aunts and cousin are delighted to report there are cats everywhere, purring and rubbing up against your legs and licking your hands if you pet them. Speaking of which, my late kitty Sasha appears among the crowd, meowing and searching for me. I try hard not to cry as I cuddle him in my lap. He rubs his head all over my hands and face, almost sticking his head in, through my mouth. When he finally jumps off, I ask Grandma if I can see the Creator and the Savior as she did. "I'm sorry," she replies, "but that can't happen until you've truly died. We've all had a wonderful visit. But I'm afraid it's time for you to go." I glance frantically at the curator. "What if I refuse?" "You can't stay," my cousin says. "In your current living body, you're not ready to be with us for more than this allotted time. If you insist on tarrying, we'll all disappear and return to our master. You'll remain here, alive and alone, forever." That sounds more like hell than heaven. "Oh, trust me, sweetie," says Grandma. "You don't want to go there. Yet I know that's what the curator has in store next. Live your life to the fullest with no regrets. Those will drive you crazy, as you've already found out. No matter what you've done or haven't done, we love you and will continue to guide you. Think well of us and remember us always." "I will. Thank you for everything. I love you." Grandma gives me one more spirit hug before she fades away, as do the others. "Come," says the curator. "Time to move on." "No, I don't want to go to hell. I know you're afraid, but 2 friends of mine are waiting for you there." I glance at my wrist and notice that the hour hand on my watch has struck 1. The walls of Gateway Travel reappear. He leads me past a receptionist's empty desk, bearing the nameplate of Rachel, then through a maze of empty cubicles. Either the air conditioner is on full blast, or the curator's continued presence makes the hairs on my arms and neck stand up straight. He leads me to an emergency exit. This is the entrance to the underworld. I must open it. Stay silent, and whatever you do, do not let go of my left hand. I clutch it tighter. With his right, he reaches toward the door and picks the lock with the nail of his index finger. The lock clicks, and the portal opens. The stench of decay hits me full in the face. I gag and hold my bile down. The curator leads me down a seemingly endless flight of stone stairs. I'm glad I'm holding his hand to keep my balance. If I slip and fall, I really will be dead. A lengthy corridor is at the bottom. I'm tired from all my physical efforts so far, and this gauntlet further exhausts me. Yet I keep pace with my guide, step by step, until we reach a vestibule lit by flaming violet torches. Two monsters await. One is a beast with the head of a wolf and the nearly naked body of a man. The other has a human head but a serpentine tail coiled neatly around his frame. I vaguely recognize them from reading Dante's Inferno in high school. "Greetings, Plutus," says the curator. "Greetings, Minnows. We have a visitor, a live one." The wolf-headed creature grins with rows of razor-sharp teeth. He sniffs the air, one who doesn't have much money and never has, but also one who loves to spend. "She'll be perfect for my domain, don't you think?" The snake-tailed monster shakes his head. "She may have spent beyond her means in the past, but she's careful with money now. She has repented. I want her with me as a chronicler of sinners' confessions." This one pays amazing attention to detail. Minnows leans in close, and I can smell his rotten breath. "What say you?" I don't say a word. The curator told me to stay quiet. An unwise choice. What shall I show you to loosen your tongue and admit your wrongdoing? Perhaps a glimpse of the second circle, where the lustful wander a barren land buffeted by the winds of passion. Or shall I give you to Plutus in the fourth, where you'll push a massive bag of money with your chest and compete against misers in a never-ending jousting tournament? The fifth might suit you better, with your being slothful, and you'll gurgle beneath the sticks. Come. He stares with glowing green eyes that have slits in the middle, like a snake's. "Since you will not speak, I demand that you write your sins down on this parchment," Minnows says. He gestures to a chair and table with a scroll, a pot of ink, and a quill. "That is the fee for entering the vestibule of hell while still living." I realize the inkpot is empty when I sit down and pick up the quill. I brace myself, then prick my palm with the pen's tip. One by one, I write down the transgressions I've committed, the inkpot filling as I work. It's agony, not least because I'm still wearing the blood-infused watch. More intense than that pain are the shame and guilt I feel as I remember each sin. Here a lie, there a carnal thought, there a succumbing to greed or envy. Hatred, too. I think I'll never finish. At last, my labors in the scroll come to an end. I give the parchment to Minnows with hands shaking so badly that I almost drop it. He reads it in a flash. "It seems to me," he says in a low, hissing voice, "that your greatest sin is not one you've documented here, but one you haven't. Pride." I gulp. "Why do you wear that timepiece? Is it not because of your vanity? Your desire for skill with the written word? As much as I hate to admit it, I do." "Then you are paradoxically fortunate. Pride is such a pervasive sin that it is not punished here but in purgatory. It can be forgiven if not acted upon. However, you took it upon yourself to wager with death every day that your new talent would be sufficient to take you to the summit of your ambitions. Sadly, you have lost. That's why we're here," says the curator. "She's already been to heaven, and now it's her turn to face hell's horrors. Understandable, however, in her living form. She is neither suitable for salvation nor damnation." "What a pity. She's mine," snaps Plutus. "She's still yearning for wealth and fame. Besides, you were once my employee," he reminds the curator, "a travel agent just like several others toiling at my command. I should take both of you, but I cannot." He howls and curls his clawed hands into fists. "She's mine," counters Minnows, due to her haughtiness, her insistence on promoting her own work. "She will write down others' sins and their stories forever. That would be a far more fitting punishment. Besides, I'm above you. You forget," says the curator, "that I am her mentor and master. She belongs to me, and I say neither of you will have her. I outrank you both." Both monsters fall silent. Then Minnows speaks again. unwinding a portion of his tail. I wish for you to witness the Lord of Darkness in his realm. The ninth circle. He is the most arrogant of all beings. His pride led him to turn against the Lord of Hosts. That is why he is also the greatest of traitors. Hold still. Well, let me show you. Minos wraps his tail around my body 9 times. I hold tight to the curator's hand. A frozen lake stretches before me with countless souls trapped inside. Many have their bowed heads and necks above the ice, weeping for their horrific fate. Many more lie beneath it, denied the luxury of movement, their bodies contorted in untenable positions. At the center of this expanse is Satan, a 3-headed, 3-mouthed dragon. He flaps his wings, creating a constant tempest and keeping the temperature at a sub-zero level. In each of his maws, he chews a famous betrayer, Brutus, Cassius, and Judas Iscariot. I hear his voice in my mind, ringing across the ice and making my sanity crack. Wretch, I have known you ever since your birth. Now you have come to me on my turf. Your every sin is written, not only on parchment but within my boundless memory. There is no hole in this lake for you to slip into yet. However, should you let go of death's hand, I'll welcome you to Cocytus. You have betrayed God by being so prideful. Just as I have. I'm sorry. I am not. I never have been. I do not weep for myself. And neither will you. The devil raises his central head and stares right into the core of my spirit. I scream. The curator pulls me back and out of the grasp of Minos' tail. His coils fall away from my body. I fall to my knees. Please forgive me. Lord, forgive me. He is not present here. Sneers Minos. Now that you've caught more than a glimpse of our Lord and Master, will you agree to my sentence instead? I can't move. I can't think. I can hardly breathe. She cannot while under my care. Says Death. My apologies. He kneels next to me. Are you ready to move on to your repentance? I barely have enough time to remember I can't speak here. I nod furiously. Farewell, friends, he tells Plutus and Minos. I hope we won't see you again. While he and I return to the surface, the two aberrations argue over whose fault it is that we're escaping. Their shouts and growls echo all the way up the stairs. With all his might, the curator yanks open the emergency exit door to gateway travel. We scramble back inside. That was close. I couldn't help but scream when Satan looked at me. I know, if you would have said one word, you would have been his. Thank you for rescuing me. You're welcome. Minos is a devious fellow, but he can't trick me. My wrist pulses in pain. I see that my watch's hour hand points at 2. Where to next? I ask the curator. He brings me to the only window inside the agency. What's the weather like? Gray and cloudy, like it's going to rain. Let me open it. Once more, he makes the lock yield with his pointed nail. Climb through. With a supreme amount of effort, pushing and pulling, I make it through the window onto a long dirt path. My protector follows me effortlessly. This way, he leads me beneath the overcast sky to yet another flight of stairs. Unlike the other one, this one's covered with muddy footprints and trails of blood. An acrid smell tells me someone's pissed here. 2. These steps are worse than the ones that lead to hell. That's because this is purgatory. Notice the bucket, bar of soap, and scrub brush over there? Here you'll wash away your sin of pride. You can't do that in hell, because hell is for the hard of heart and mean of spirit. You told the devil you were sorry. Did you mean it? With all my heart. Prove it. Climb all the way up. Then scrub all the way down. I'll meet you here when you're done. One word of complaint and you'll have to start again. If you encounter a sinner with muddy, bloody feet, you may treat them as you will, but the mess will be the same. Farewell for now, Cinderella. As he says this last bit, I find myself in rags, with no shoes on my feet. I pick up the cleaning supplies and start climbing. The ascent takes so long that I think the curator has pulled a fast one, that these stairs actually go on forever. Besides, I let others pass me on their way up. We grit our teeth and bite our tongues, knowing that grumbling will send us straight to the bottom. I hold all my emotions in, but one thing I can't keep holding is my bladder. I, too, relieve myself on the steps, knowing I'll have to wash it off. When I finally reach the top, I sit down and take a breather. Rain begins to fall. It fills up my bucket. Time to get to work. As I scrub, I sing every song I know relating to hardship and challenge. From Sing Sweet Nightingale From Disney's Cinderella to Via Dolorosa by Sandy Patty to the opening theme of Divinity. Original Sin 2. I try, whistle while you work. But I can't whistle, I can only warble, my words swallowed by rumbling thunder. This task is grueling, but I empathize with the ones who climb. They have it much worse than I do. I cry out words of hope and encouragement, and they smile back. Their torment is lessened just a tiny bit, but it means the world to us. Even purgatory doesn't stand a chance when we cheer each other on. The final stair approaches. It's the dirtiest by far. I scour it with all my strength and even some from beyond. The curator waits. When I finish, he embraces me. Congratulations, you've completed your trial successfully. With time to spare. Huh? The grandfather clock in my watch read 2:55. 5 minutes until 3 a.m. Are we done traveling? Can I go home, please? One more vista must we explore. My home plane beyond space and time. Recite the phrase that H.P. Lovecraft wrote about death. If you would, I clear my throat. That is not dead which can eternal lie. And with strange eons even death may die. Correct. Both of us are living on borrowed time. Oh, no. How much do we have left? 1 hour. Then you must come to a decision. And it shall be everlasting. We return to the foyer of Gateway Travel. See that clock above Rachel's desk? It also reads 2:55. He takes it off the wall. Press it hard, as you did with the picture of your grandmother's house. And we'll move beyond the boundaries of time and space. The only thing that'll hold us to our current state is my watch on your wrist. Again. Do not let go of my left hand. I obey his instructions. Not only do our surroundings blur and warp, but I can't remember whether I went to heaven before or after hell and purgatory. The very concept of time is becoming more and more vague. Maybe it always has been. Strange shapes coalesce into squat buildings and spindly towers. Black stars hang overhead in a chartreuse sky. Lost spirits meander aimlessly, searching for landmarks but finding none in this labyrinthine city. As we make our way along the cobblestone streets, I hear the wandering shades mumble in a language unknown to me. Pastor Ajeb. Ihaina Ahor Ib. The curator translates. Pastor is here. No one can flee. You mean the king in yellow? One of Lovecraft's great old ones? The curator nods. Oh, dear, what is this place? And why are we here? We must travel through Carcosa to the other side, where I made my decision. I wonder which one he's talking about. The choice to live on Earth. Maybe? A group of cultists in saffron yellow robes appears. I don't want to follow them. I resist with every fiber of my being, planting my feet, but the curator pulls me along. They repeat the Pastor Ajeb phrase along with a new one. Ailanag Hastur Limbikai. The crowd comes to Hastur to hear him speak. Should we be doing this? I whisper. Aren't we walking into a trap? It's the only way. These acolytes know the location of the black jade obelisk within the furthest spire. That's what we need to reach. As terrified as I am that we'll be discovered, an instinctive part of me is curious about this sect and the eldritch horror that it worships. From what I remember of Hastur, he seeks power over artists, playwrights, and storytellers. The author of The King in Yellow was reported to be possessed while writing that manuscript. Good thing I've already made my bargain. Which being is more powerful? Though, the cultists trudge along a steep incline toward one of the towers. It isn't the tallest, but it is the most oddly shaped, like the serrated edge of a saw blade. The sky above roils with yellowish-green clouds. I wonder if it'll rain here like it did in Purgatory. I'm still wearing rags, and if they get wetter, I'll be miserable indeed. Several of the lost souls I saw earlier join us. They stare straight ahead at rapt attention, like soldiers in an army. Though they don't march, they shamble and scramble as they make the climb, driven by a compulsion they don't understand. Or perhaps they do. That's even worse. Keep going, says the curator. We're almost there. The cultists pass under a vaulted archway and come up to a set of doors. I can neither see nor hear the leader, but there's a pause before they open. Perhaps one of them painted a sign in blood to let their fellow priests enter. We barely make it inside before the doors slam shut, the sound ringing in my ears. We're in some sort of vestibule, like in hell, but this one's lit by red lamps. They make the cultists' robes appear bright orange. They form a line, one after another. They approach a platform and are lifted up to another level of the tower. We take our turn without faltering. One mistake here means a fate worse than death, even for my companion, for I feel his wrinkled hand tremble in mine. We see a figure at the front of a vast throne room, an octopoid being in a hooded yellow robe. The novices bow down before him, chanting, Pastor Ajeb, in unison. We fall flat to the ground but do not follow suit. We can't. The voice of the king in yellow fills our mutual consciousness. He does not speak, he sings, and the music that comes from his faceless maw nearly drives me mad. Its notes are both higher and lower than any human has a right to hear. And the crescendos make my body shake all over. The curator seems less affected, but even he is scared. When Haster gestures for us to rise, we do so and disperse. The two of us have to get out of here as fast as possible before we're found out. We use the cultists and lost souls as camouflage, ducking and weaving among them until the curator points out an exit. We dash through it to find ourselves in a room with a high ceiling, blue-lit wall sconces, and a massive obelisk of black jade in the middle. Unfortunately, one of Haster's thralls has followed us. He raises a knife and heads straight for me. The curator reaches out and touches him. He falls over dead. When I recover from the shock of this display of power, my guide explains, this is nephrite, the sacred gem of the outer gods and those such as myself. It is hailed as the dream stone for its spiritual properties. I first saw this monument in a dream, back when I was an agent at Gateway Travel. I read the inscriptions on it and realized that if I touched it, I could venture far beyond Earth and the universe, to locations even conventional space-time can't touch. I learned how to guide others through these instructions. I even learned, how to die once I become death. That was the price I had to pay. But even I won't last forever. Strange eons are passing as we speak. My time draws near. You mean, yes, you have a decision to make. And it is final. You not only wear my watch but bear my mark. Your body, soul, and spirit no longer pertain to the mortal world. You can either accept death and enter heaven with your late friends and loved ones or become the next curator. If you choose the latter, eventually, you must find someone else to pass the torch to. Think long and hard before you decide. Why would I take your place? I've literally been to hell and back. Mine is a work of great compassion, even when a spirit must face damnation or a long purification process. At least they will have moved on from your world. There is progress on both the higher and the lower planes of existence. Whether to keep rising or falling, I have progressed as much as I am able. Now I face my own demise. I may not have lived the best life, but I've paid for it through being the best avatar of death that I can be. Please let me sleep, dear tenant, knowing that countless spirits will be safe with you. You have willing hands and a good heart. If I die without a replacement, no one will move on. The dead themselves will rise in righteous indignation. That will doom every world, including this one. What about Sophie Taffis, the one who got me into this mess in the beginning? Funny you should ask. She died this early morning at 1 a.m. of natural causes. Her heart failed her, and her spirit passed on to purgatory. Don't worry, she'll be fine, despite everything she and her gift have put me through. I shed a few tears. Have you come to a resolution? The curator asks as the hour approaches 4. I have. I take a deep breath. If what you say is true, I'll take your place. Then touch the obelisk. Hurry, I feel myself fading away. I press my palm to the cold black stone. Endless landscapes fill my mind. From the purple mountain majesties and fruited plain of the United States to the ancient cities of Europe to the fabled plateau of Leng. All of the beings in all of these worlds breathe a sigh of relief. Whether they be alive, dead, or some state in between, they know I'll come for them in the end to bring them rest. The curator has disappeared, leaving his fedora and trench coat behind. I put them on. My watch is still ticking. I must return to Earth. I have work to do. November is for gratitude for all the risks you've taken during the year. I've risked everything tonight to save an entity intent on claiming me. Here's hoping we'll both find peace. My family has an odd history of tragedy, at least. That's what my grandma would always say. It comes in waves. It comes when it wants to. She would ominously say. But we all knew she was superstitious and generally odd. According to my mom, who has a much strained relationship with her, she had always been eccentric. The only tragedy I vaguely remember myself is the death of my little sister Holly. Or Hole as I would always call her. I was 10 at the time and I don't recall much. My memory is like an old photograph left out in the rain, distorted. Bleeding at the edges, warped in ways I don't understand. I know I was there when it happened. But when I try to reach back, the details feel wrong, shuffled, like a story someone else told me, and I just learned to repeat it. The more I try to remember, the more uncertain I become. Advertisements after the death of Hole. My mom and grandma grew even further apart. Grandma kept insisting something about her death wasn't right. She would talk about an evil presence. In her worst moments, she would even go as far as throwing accusations against both me and my mom. Having eventually had enough, my mom cut all ties with her. It was the only way we could start grieving properly. She said, for 12 years we continued as a family and did our best to move on together in what had always seemed to me a haunted house that was now just a little shorter on love. A little colder and desolate. For a while, it seemed we were slowly heading in the right direction. That was until my mom started whispering to herself when she thought no one was around. It started a couple of years ago. Initially, my dad and I thought nothing of it. When we caught her from time to time, she would brush it aside. It's nice to talk to a rational person on occasion, she would chuckle. It honestly didn't seem like any reason to worry. Then one night I heard her whispering to herself from inside her bedroom. My dad and she hadn't shared a bedroom for a while at that point. I'm not a person to intrude on other people's personal space. But I heard her whispering my name. It got my attention. So, there I stood, in the dark upstairs hallway of my parents' house spying on my mom. I know it might sound weird. But here's the thing. She had been acting strangely for a while now. Distant, almost a bit hostile toward me. And I had no idea why. It seemed she might be angry at me for some unknown reason. We were never any good at actually talking to each other. The less said, the better, could have been the family motto. This felt like an opportunity I had to jump at. I put my ear to the door and listened carefully. She spoke in a low, muffled, and angry whisper. Her voice slithered through the silence. Dry and rasping, like dead leaves scraping across pavement. It was extremely hard to hear anything. But here's the gist of what I got. Julian, my name, doesn't. Hole, leave, was, evil, fault? I felt a cold shiver down my spine. As I stood there, my ear pressed against the door. I felt a sneeze coming on at the worst possible time. I tried to kill it but to no avail. Not long after I heard footsteps approaching the door. I jumped backward and retreated down the stairs as quickly as I could. I paused at the bottom of the stairs in the main hallway and looked up. I heard the bedroom door open. Then I saw my mom's face peeking over the stair railing. The light behind her cast her features in an unnatural shadow, stretching her eyes into dark, bottomless pits. Her mouth was slightly open, just enough to reveal the glint of teeth. For a split second, it didn't even look like her face. It looked like a mask constantly changing shape. If you've ever tried staring at your reflection in the mirror in a darkly lit room, squinting slightly, you'll know what I mean. My stomach tightened. I was sure she couldn't see me in the darkness downstairs. But then, she tilted her head, just slightly, as if she could. It seemed like her eyes were staring straight into mine. I remained motionless, afraid to move, afraid she would notice me. Finally, she retreated into the bedroom. I didn't sleep much that night. My thoughts were all over the place. Why had my mom been whispering angrily to herself about me and Hole? Who was evil? I wanted to confront her, but how could I? I would have to admit to spying on her. I had to know more. And seeing no other option, I decided to keep spying on her. The only problem was, I couldn't hear her properly from outside the bedroom with the door closed. I needed to be in the room. The following nights I would hide in my mom's bedroom, under her bed. It felt wrong. It truly did. But I had to know what she was whispering to herself about. Confronting her was not an option. On the fourth night, it happened. I was lying trapped really, under the bed when the low, angry, and growling whisper began filling the room. I had never heard a whisper so full of rage before. It was a whisper stretched too thin, trembling on the edge of something far worse. The words dripped with quiet, seething fury like they were being torn from deep within her. They never mention you. They all forgot. I'm the only one who cares. The only one who ever cared. The whisper crept into the room and seemed to speak from the walls. I didn't know until then how terrifying and angry a person can sound while whispering. I couldn't believe this sound came from my mom. There's something wrong with Julian. There was always something wrong with him. I wish you could tell me how you feel. Tell me what you think. I felt an intense fear and unease mixed with sadness. Was this what my mom had always thought of me? That something was wrong with me? Why did it seem like the last sentence she spoke had been directed to someone else in the room with her? I tried to keep myself composed. I couldn't have her discover me now. Creeping under the bed, it became nearly impossible for me when a second whisper, which I knew wasn't my mom, suddenly appeared. Something must be done about Julian. He must be punished. The pitch was all wrong, high and thin, with childish undertones. It wavered between something innocent and something utterly unnatural, twisting and twitching with a jagged, broken quality that sent a shiver down my spine. To my horror, I realized that somewhere in that angry, resentful pitch were traces of Hull's voice. At first, I thought it was an echo, a trick of the mind. But then I heard it, the way she used to say my name. Julian. She never was able to pronounce the J part, but there was no warmth or innocence left in it. Just anger and something else. Hurt perhaps, or disappointment. He must be punished. Hull's whisper seemed to come from right beside me now. I covered my mouth and started sobbing. I couldn't help it, hearing Hull's voice again speaking those words. I never really believed in ghosts, demons, or any of the things my grandma seemed to believe in. Yet how could I explain this? I'll make sure he gets what he deserves. Hull. I was in a state of shock. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My mom was whispering to my dead sister, and they both seemed to hate me for some reason that completely escaped me. I know I probably wasn't always the best brother or the best son. Heck, there are a lot of things about me I don't like. But did I deserve their hatred? Their anger? Maybe I did. Suddenly the whispers stopped. I could hear my mom moving about the room. Had she heard my sobbing? For what seemed like agonizing hours I held my breath until the light was turned off and my mom went to bed. I waited until I was sure she was asleep and crept out from under the bed. As quietly as possible, I opened the door, but just as I was about to close it behind me, I heard her. Julian, is that you? I was caught. I slowly turned around. She was sitting up in the bed, bathed in darkness. I could barely see her expression, yet it seemed to be judging me. I'm sorry, Mom. I had no words, nothing to explain why I was suddenly standing there. Is everything okay? Her voice sounded tired and angry. I shifted back and forth on my feet nervously. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. It's nothing. We can talk about it tomorrow. Brilliant. I had time to come up with an excuse. Hopefully, she hadn't seen me crawl out from under her bed. It's late. Julian, you should get some sleep. I nodded. Good night. I closed the door and instantly felt a panic attack coming on. Like the fabric of my soul was being torn into. The following morning was awkward, to say the least. My mom casually asked why I had been in her bedroom the night before. And all I could muster up was, I wanted to ask you if I could borrow the car today. She sighed. I sensed she didn't believe me. Sure, honey. Just don't take too long. I need it by tonight. I nodded silently. My mom then said, looking up from her book, are you sure there's nothing else you want to talk about? You know you can always talk to me, right? Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that felt misplaced. Her gaze lingered a second too long, making my skin crawl. My dad took notice of the tension and shifted uncomfortably in his chair. No, Mom, really, I just needed to borrow the car. She held my gaze for an excruciatingly long time before she spoke. You know, you've been acting strange lately. I almost choked on my coffee. I've been acting strange lately? I felt a strong urge to confront her about everything I'd heard. About the whispers, all of it, but then I realized how insane it would have sounded. My dead sister and Mom whispering to each other. My dad would take her side. Surely, they might even send me away to some institution. Was that their goal? I felt like a moth pinned to a board under her stare, squirming under the weight of her unspoken accusations. I've been stressed lately, I said finally. I still have trouble finding a job. It wears me out a little." Her face was unreadable, but it felt like she was smirking behind her neutral gaze. Like she was taking joy in the fact that I was struggling to get my life together. "Sure, I understand, but please don't feel like a failure. Everyone falls on hard times." Her voice seemed condescending, spiteful. I got up and left. I never said I felt like a failure. She sighed as I left the uncomfortable conversation behind. I retreated down the basement to my bedroom to think it all over. I couldn't risk spying on her again, but I couldn't just wait for whatever horrifying plan they had in store for me. Whatever punishment they felt I deserved. Something was very, very wrong. It felt it with every inch of my being. Just then, I thought about my grandma's warnings. I remembered how my mom had cut her off, written her off as a superstitious oddball. Considering everything, it now seemed I might do well listening to her for once. I had already gotten permission to borrow the car, so I decided to go see her. Grandma lived on the other side of town in a parcel house. Her front yard was overgrown with weeds. She had gotten too old to tend to it herself and had no one else to do it for her. I felt bad. My mom decided to cut her off. Yet the rest of us followed her lead without much question. It had been years since I visited her. When I rang the bell, a sudden rush of nostalgia came over me as I heard the tune playing. "Oh, When the Saints Go Marching In." I remembered then, despite her oddities, how much I had enjoyed spending time with her before Hole died. She invited me in with a smile on her face. If she was angry with me for not visiting more, it didn't show. The state of her house was in a similar decrepit condition as her front yard. Boxes, trinkets, old souvenirs, and religious and occult objects flooded the place. The air inside was heavy, tinged with the faint metallic scent of old coins and something sour that I couldn't place. Shadows seemed to pool in the corners of her living room, too deep for the weak light to penetrate. I suddenly felt watched from the darkness. I sat, not knowing what to say, but it seemed she knew better than me. "You look tired, dear," I sighed. We exchanged a few trivial words before I mustered up the strength to ask. "You once said this family had a history of tragedy. Like some kind of curse?" She nodded. "Your mom and I never saw eye to eye on that. She wouldn't hear it. I suppose she thought I was a superstitious old hag." She chuckled, but her eyes betrayed her. "Maybe I am, but we are who we are." I looked around at the strange symbols and objects that hung on her walls. "Can you tell me about it?" Her eyes lit up as if she'd been waiting for someone to ask her. Yet she seemed worried too. "Julian, dear, is something wrong?" I paused. "I think I'm cursed. I haven't been feeling all right lately. Something is wrong." She looked at me, concerned, fearful. "It's found you, hasn't it?" she whispered, almost as if the words themselves could summon something from the shadows. I swear it felt like the whispers were now inside my head, echoing and bouncing off the walls of my skull. "You're not getting away. You're not getting away. She can't help you." They grew louder, overlapping and swirling together until they became a cacophony of taunts. Words I couldn't fully grasp burrowed into my mind like claws. I did my best to ignore it. "What is it?" Grandma sighed. "Something as old as time, I suppose. It causes trouble and tragedy wherever it goes. Breaking you down slowly. It wants to be you. Wants you to think it's you." I felt uneasy in my entire body. "I don't understand. That makes no sense." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Everyone has to find out for themselves before it's too late. It took your uncle. Before that, it took your grandfather. Even before that, accidents, deaths, tragedy." I felt more confused than ever. "Didn't my uncle take his own life?" Grandma interrupted. "It made him do it. It whispered in his ears. That's what it does. You know, it whispers when it doesn't scream. Your uncle didn't just take his own life," Grandma said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He was hollowed out. Like something had scooped out his will and left him an empty shell." I had come looking for answers, but I was left more confused than ever. "Why does it use my sister's voice? I don't understand." She looked at me with the weary weight of a lifetime's knowledge. "Only you know the answer to that. I can't help you fight it. I can't take you on this journey. I can only show you the door. It knows you, and it will use that against you. It knows your fears, your insecurities. It will take everything you love and turn it into something ugly. Once you're weak enough, it will come for you. come to finish you off." She got up and started going through some old stuff. She found what looked like a wooden trinket, a circle with strange markings on it. She handed me the carved circle. "Wear this," she said, her voice trembling. "It will help. But remember, this can't save you. Only you can do that." I was floored. "How do you fight something like that?" She took my hand. "You know, look into yourself, and you'll know." Her touch brought me back in time. Hole was there. We were playing hide and seek in Grandma's house. It was just before Christmas, and the smell of cinnamon was everywhere. I had searched for what felt like hours. Suddenly, I heard a wailing. I followed the sound until I found her in the playhouse out in Grandma's backyard. She had accidentally locked herself inside. "You didn't find me. I thought you'd left me." I thought, and just like that, I was back in the room with Grandma. I felt tears welling up. I can't do this alone. Ever since Hole died, things have. Mom hates me. She whispers terrible things about me. Dad doesn't even seem to care enough to hate me. Grandma shook her head. "You can. And you will. You're not alone. But this one thing, you must do alone. You must look into yourself as you confront it. And you must confront it. There is no escape. There is no running away. It will come for you. Again and again. Until it comes one last time." I was on the verge of giving up. I don't know how to do that. I don't even know where to begin. She gently grabbed my shoulder. "You've forgotten so much, haven't you? I can't help you see it. But maybe I can show you the way. Look in your parents' attic. There's a yellow, faded box up there. Find it. Maybe it will help you remember. Help you see what you need to see." I felt defeated, hopeless, yet still determined to keep fighting. As I got up, I stopped for a moment. "Grandma, what really happened between you and Mom? Why don't you talk?" She looked at me. Her eyes were old and tired. "We both said things we shouldn't have said. Your mom and I, we're very different. Dear, people handle tragedy differently." I nodded and headed for the door. "Julian, dear," I stopped. "Remember what I said." When I arrived back at my parents' house, the sun was still high. It was afternoon, and I knew they wouldn't be home for at least a couple of hours. I had time. My grandma had wanted me to find something in the attic. She'd been cryptic, as always, but the weight of her words stayed with me. "Maybe it will help you remember. Help you see what you need to see." I found the wooden ladder tucked neatly in the closet, just where it had always been. The hatch to the attic groaned as I pulled it down, the sound carrying through the empty house. As I climbed, each step felt heavier than the last. I tried to brace myself for what I might find. The attic was unchanged, standing exactly as it had done when Hole and I used to play hide and seek here, dusty, old, and shrouded in an eerie stillness that seemed to press against my chest. The wooden beams overhead cast long shadows in the dim light filtering through the lone window. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, sounding fragile, as if they might give way at any moment. The air was thick with rot and dust, a stale, suffocating aroma that crawled into my throat and refused to leave. "Look for a yellow faded box," Grandma had said. I scanned the cluttered space and spotted a pile of boxes beneath a tattered blanket. The fabric was rough and grimy, like it had been abandoned to time. My hands brushed over the rough texture as I peeled it back. And there it was, a large, faded yellow box. Scribbled on the side were the names, Julian and Holly. My stomach sank with trembling hands. I lifted the lid. The stale scent of old cardboard hit me immediately. And for a moment, I hesitated, half expecting something terrible to leap out at me. But all that greeted me were toys, faded drawings, and an old photo album. My chest loosened in relief. But the unease lingered. I sifted through the contents, each item dragging me back through memories and feelings I thought I had buried long ago. There was Leo, Hole's favorite stuffed white tiger. She'd adored him, carrying him everywhere, playing with him for hours. I'd been jealous, and because of me, Leo now wore an eye patch that my mom had lovingly sewn. His white fur was matted and gray with age, the little patch still crooked. Holding it now, I felt the sting like a knife in my side. It wasn't just a toy. It had been her joy. And I'd scarred it. Was I like that? Did I have trouble controlling my emotions? Did I take it out on Hole? I was a kid, I whispered aloud, trying to rationalize it. But the thought turned sour. Something shifted in the air. A barely perceptible sound. Whispers carried by the addict's stale breath. No excuse. The words coiled around me. Soft at first, then louder, crashing in a rising crescendo. No excuse. I shook my head, desperate to quiet them. I hummed a tune I barely remembered. A childhood melody that brought me a sliver of comfort. Beneath the toys were drawings, mine. Mostly, memories of afternoons spent with crayons and markers came flooding back. Hadn't I also drawn things for Hole? I had. I remembered. Draw me tigers, rainbows, and sunflowers, she'd say with wide eyes. And I'd oblige. For Hole. The words on the drawing said, the ones with tigers, rainbows, and sunflowers. Crudely drawn tigers played under rainbows. Wobbly sunflowers stretched tall under bright blue skies. But not all the drawings were like that. The others, the ones I'd made just for me, were different. I flipped through them, the familiar unease returning. My mom's voice echoed in my mind. So many of your drawings have ghosts in them. She wasn't wrong. I hadn't noticed it as a child. But now, staring at the crude figures, I couldn't deny it. One drawing caught my eye, a family portrait. Stick figures, all of us together, except I'd drawn myself twice. One version of me stood with the others, smiling. The second, it was scrawled in red, thick and angry, overlapping lines that slashed across the page like open wounds. The whispers came again, closer this time, always broken, always evil. I dropped the drawing, my hands trembling. What had Grandma wanted me to see? What had she hoped I'd remember? The ghosts in the drawings weren't just stick figures, they were hollow-eyed. Monstrous things. Their smiles stretched too wide, jagged mouths curling unnaturally across their faces. Why had I drawn these things? I flipped to another drawing, a grotesque scene of a monster killing a man. Below it, in a child's scrawl, I had written, "It's fun to murder." I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. Just a kid with a vivid imagination. It didn't mean anything, right? That old horror movie, the one that had given me nightmares, had probably inspired me. The one with the murderous doll, Child's Play. I think it was called. But the whispers disagreed. You lied to yourself, they hissed. Their voices wrapped around me, overlapping in a maddening chorus that rose from every shadow in the attic. You were always broken, dark and twisted. Poor Hole. She suffered because of you. No, I screamed, clamping my hands over my ears. I started humming the tune Hole and I used to sing together, trying to drown out the voices. But it didn't help. They weren't coming from the attic, they were inside my head. I stood up and raised my voice to try and push them away. I'm a good person. I would never hurt my sister. The whispers hissed at me angrily. Words I could hardly deny. Evil people don't know they're evil. I dropped to my knees, lost and defeated. This couldn't be what Grandma wanted me to see. Did she set me up? Was she in on it all? Anger gnawed at my soul like rats chewing through rotting wood. Keep going, a voice commanded, louder and sharper than the rest. It cut through the noise like a knife. I obeyed. I opened the photo album, flipping through the pages of old, faded Polaroids bleached by time. There we were, Hole and me, side by side in nearly every photo. I hadn't looked at these in years, as if seeing her face would bring back something I'd rather leave behind. She smiled at me now, from the old, faded Polaroid, one of the last taken of her and me before she died. Forever 8 years old, sitting next to me in our parents' old storage space, where we kept all the Christmas decorations, where we used to play. Her expression haunted me, something about the way she sat, slightly too far away from me, as if something had spooked her. The whispers grew louder, their words like daggers. Yes, 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 she was scared of you. Scared of you. No, I yelled, my voice shaking as I almost slammed the album shut. But then my eyes caught another Polaroid. It was of me and Hole in our parents' garden, standing beneath 2 towering sunflowers. Our smiling faces beamed with innocent, unrestrained joy. Draw me tall sunflowers. Her small voice echoed in my head, faint and almost drowned by the whispers. My mom once told me that, to a child, the world feels vast, mysterious, and full of adventure. Everything is new. Everything begs to be explored. A single leaf can hold an entire universe. Most of us forget what that is like. But I remember now, in our garden, Hole and I saw a jungle, our jungle. Flowers, weeds, and trees became enchanted kingdoms. We were explorers, greeting every creature like an old friend, gazing up at the sunflowers that seemed to stretch into the bright blue sky. I remember the first time Hole saw a rainbow. We were lying on the grass, rain lightly falling around us. We didn't have a care in the world, just enjoying the calmness of the moment. Her eyes lit up with wonder as she tugged on my shirt. "What is that pretty thing in the sky?" she asked and pointed. "It's a rainbow, Hole," I told her. She dragged me around the rest of the day trying to chase it down. It seemed to me that we almost caught it. On lazy summer days, we would play this game, pretending one of us was a big hungry tiger chasing the other through the garden. I remember the rush of weaving through the bushes, leaves lightly brushing against my skin, branches snapping back as I tore ahead. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with the wild thrill of the chase. Behind me, Hole was gaining, her playful growls blending with the rustling of the wind. She was the tiger, fierce and relentless. I ran until my lungs burned. I ran until her tiny hands finally caught my shirt, and we tumbled into the grass, breathless and laughing. The world around us nothing but sunlight, tangled limbs, and the echo of our joy. After she died, the garden changed. It looked the same but felt different, empty of something essential, occupied by something monstrous. What once was a jungle of wonder, a kaleidoscope of greens, yellows, reds, and purple bursting with life, now seemed to be a fading, lifeless version of its former self. The leaves seemed dull, their edges curling inward like clawed hands. The sunflowers loomed less like gentle giants and more like towering sentinels, guarding something sinister and forgotten. As I sat in the dim attic, the old Polaroid trembling in my hands, the dust-heavy air felt thick with memories. My fingers traced the faded edges, and suddenly, I was back in the garden, back inside a memory of the last time I ever ran through our garden, our jungle. I was 14, chasing a feeling, desperate to recapture something lost. I sprinted through the overgrown weeds and tangled bushes, my breath hitching, my pulse hammering like it used to. I imagined Hole behind me, her laughter ringing through the leaves, her playful growls close at my heels. For a fleeting moment, the magic sparked to life again. Then I heard it, branches crackling behind me, bushes being trampled through, the laughter coupled with growling. Her laughter, her growling, only it wasn't. It sounded wrong, like a deliberately bad imitation, a wailing, painful laughter devoid of joy or innocence. An angry, guttural growl. I stopped and glanced over my shoulder, and that's when I saw her, pale, ghostly, slightly obscured through the weeds and bushes. Her eyes, those dead, accusing eyes, stared straight at me, eyes that had closed forever and been buried years ago. I froze, paralyzed by fear, as she slowly crept out from the shadow of the bushes. She crawled on all fours like she used to, pretending to be a tiger. Only this time, her movements were predatory, deliberate, menacing. Her limbs, broken and twisted as they had been the day she died, jerked unnaturally with every step, like a marionette controlled by unseen strings. The growling deepened, layered with something that didn't belong to her small frame. Her face, once so full of life, was now pale and contorted with hatred. The light that had danced in her eyes during our childhood adventures was gone, replaced by an empty, seething darkness. Her lips twisted into a wicked, unnatural smile that stretched far too wide, splitting her pale face like a gash. Jagged, dirty teeth, too many to count, filled a mouth that seemed to grow larger the longer I stared. Her bright blue eyes turned to black pits, glinting with an otherworldly hate that seemed to pierce my very soul. "Don't you want to play anymore?" Her voice was guttural, a hideous growl that rumbled from deep inside her throat. I turned and ran. I ran like I'd never done before. My chest burned, my heart pounded, but I didn't dare stop. There would be no giggling or collapsing in fits of laughter this time. If she caught me, I knew it wouldn't end with joy. Behind me, I heard her, half wailing, half growling, a rising crescendo of fury. Her voice rang out, a guttural howl that sent shivers down my spine. "It's your fault. It's all your fault. And now you leave me here alone." Her words tore through the air, sharp and ragged, like 1,000 nails scraping against bone. The sound vibrated in my skull, drilling into my thoughts. Branches whipped at my face, cutting my skin as I ran. The air around me felt thick and heavy, carrying the acrid scent of decay. My lungs burned as I gasped for breath, pushing my legs harder than I ever thought possible. The crackling of branches behind me grew louder. Her howling was closer now, and I was certain she'd catch me. I screamed, the sound ripping from my throat, raw and desperate. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a voice calling out, a lifeline. I burst out of the bushes and into the open. Strong arms wrapped around me. I thrashed wildly, convinced she'd caught me. It wasn't until I felt the familiar warmth of my mom's embrace that I realized I was safe. I buried my face in her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. She held me tightly, rubbing my back in silent comfort. "What happened?" she asked softly. But I couldn't possibly begin to explain. No more words were said about it. We were never good at talking in my family. As I glanced back, tears blurring my vision, I saw her, half hidden in the bushes. Her pale, ghoulish face stared at me with those empty, hateful eyes. That smile, God, that smile, was still there, carved into her face like a cruel scar. Had she always been there, watching me through the years? Through my lonely, sibling-less childhood? Always one step behind, waiting for the right moment to strike? No, this wasn't her. It couldn't be. This was something else. Something monstrous. This was the it Grandma had warned me about. How could I fight something when I didn't even know what it was? What it wanted? I know I wasn't the best brother. I know I've screwed up, then and now. I could never be like her. Perfect Holly. I wasn't there for her when she needed me most. Maybe I was even to blame for what happened to her. Is that what it wanted me to admit? Would that bring me peace? I couldn't tell where the whispers ended, and my own thoughts began. They echoed in my mind, relentless and accusing. I took the Polaroid of Hold Me, and the sunflowers. I took the drawings I'd made for her, too. I held onto the memories, of running through the bushes, of laughter, of childhood wonder. I didn't know what was coming, but I needed those memories. I needed them close. The next day after my trip to the attic, I paced around my bedroom in the basement, trying to figure out how to proceed. I could hear the whispers again, coiling around my thoughts, squeezing the clarity out of my mind. Had they always been there, just beneath the surface, waiting to be heard? Each word felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone who knew something I didn't. Something is wrong with you, they hissed. Maybe they were right. Something was out to get me. I knew that much. And it was conspiring with my mom, turning her against me. My thoughts were interrupted, disturbed by her presence. "Julian, did you forget to put gas in the car?" I jumped up in surprise. I guess I did. Mom, could you knock before you barge in?" She looked at me with a condescending expression. "You wouldn't have this problem if you found your own place. You know." Her voice was sharp and desperate, as if worn down by years of frustration, but there was something else now. A strange undertone, something that didn't belong to her. I looked at her uneasily. "I'm trying, things aren't." She sighed and changed the subject. "Julian, did you go to the attic?" I froze. I was about to lie but realized she wouldn't be asking this question if she didn't already know the answer. "Yes, I was just going through some old stuff and..." She interrupted me. "You and Holly's old stuff. I know, you should put things back where they belong if you're going to go digging through it all. And please put the ladder back in the closet next time." My entire body tensed up. Her demeanor seemed almost threatening. Something behind her eyes glaring at me menacingly. "I'm sorry, I guess I forgot." She sighed again, turned to leave, but then stopped as if contemplating something. She turned to face me again. "Why were you going through that stuff anyway? Julian, we really need to talk about your behavior lately." The whispers crept around my childhood bedroom, closing in, and surrounding me. "She knows what you are. She knows what you are. Broken, twisted, evil. Won't be long now. Won't be long." I took a step back. "I just wanted to look at it." "Something wrong with that?" "There's nothing to talk about." She looked at me suspiciously for an uncomfortably long time. "This can't go on," she finally said and left. That same night, as I went upstairs to get a drink from the kitchen, I heard my parents talking inside the living room. I stayed as quiet as I could, trying to listen in. Eventually, as I knew it would, their conversation landed on me. He's always been like this, I heard my dad say. My mom's voice was muffled, but I got the gist of her response. We need to deal with him. We can't ignore this. Something is wrong with him. I'm afraid of what he might do if we don't react soon. My veins turned to ice as I heard my dad agreeing with her. The whispers crept around me again, mocking me with their evil taunts. No help from Daddy. No help at all. This thing had turned what was left of my family against me now. I felt more alone than ever before as I went downstairs that night. After shifting and turning restlessly in my bed for hours, I fell into an uneasy sleep. When I woke the next morning, still sleepy and droopy-eyed, I saw something that terrified me beyond comprehension. My mom was watching me through the crack of slightly open door into my bedroom. I didn't hear her footsteps. She just appeared. Her face was half-shadowed in the doorframe. Her eyes, those eyes, so far removed from the softness I once knew. They burned with something darker, something old and sinister. Her mouth stretched into a half-smile, a twisted smile that didn't reach her eyes. I buried my face in the pillow. I couldn't take this much longer. How much more was this thing going to torture me before it finally finished me off? I stayed away from my parents the entire day. I wandered the woods behind our house, trying to muster up whatever strength was left in me. I went through everything. The whispers, my mom's strange and hostile behavior, Pole's apparition, Grandma's warnings, memories of joyful childhood innocence broken into pieces. The confusion rose within me like a storm of muddled feelings, thoughts, and memories all blending together. I knew something was drawing closer. I knew it wouldn't be long. The beginning of the end happened later that night. I heard my mom's voice calling from her bedroom. Julian, I need you here, now. She sounded slightly commanding. I felt almost hypnotized, and my legs started walking toward the bedroom door, even though a voice in the back of my mind told me not to go. Was this really her? How could I be sure anymore? I opened the door. Darkness greeted me. I shuddered and instantly reached for the light switch. The room was empty. Unease and dread filled me as I closed the door. I got halfway down the stairs when I heard her calling out again. Julian, get in here. You and I need to talk. The voice now sounded much sterner than it had before, like a mom scolding a young child. Yet I wasn't a child anymore, and that voice surely couldn't belong to my mom. I continued down the stairs when the voice yelled out so loud. It rattled the very bones of the house. Julian, don't think you can get away. Young man, you are in big trouble. I darted down the stairs as fast as I could. I searched for my mom around the empty, haunted rooms of my childhood home. I felt an intense need for her at that moment. My real mom, not whatever, had screamed at me from the bedroom or whispered about me in the middle of the night. She was nowhere to be found. Then it dawned on me. I hadn't checked the small storage room in the back of the bedroom. I dreaded thinking of why she would be sitting there, yelling for me to join her. She wasn't well. This wasn't her. It couldn't be. That thing had possessed her. Then I remembered my grandma's words. You have to confront it. There is no escape. I went upstairs and into my mom's bedroom once again. There's no escape. I couldn't let it tear me apart, tear my family apart without at least putting up a fight. I looked at the small door to the storage room. Pole and I had spent so much time in there. Our favorite hiding spot. We'd decorate the place with the Christmas ornaments my mom stored there. Christmas in July. We'd laugh and giggle until our stomachs hurt. My mom wasn't a fan of the mess we'd sometimes make, but we loved it. The door now seemed like a gateway into my childhood, beckoning me home. I didn't expect to find any cheerful laughter or Christmas decorations adorning the place, but I had to confront it. I patted my pocket. The Polaroid and the crumbled old drawings were still in there. With a heavy sigh, I slowly opened the door, ready to put an end to this once and for all, ready to find the truth, whatever it was. The light in the storage space hasn't worked properly for some time now. Only the middle section was lit up by a weak bulb that didn't provide much light. It left the far end in total darkness. I gathered myself and called out, I don't know what you are. Maybe some kind of demon. But a low, hissing voice slithered out from the darkness. A twisted mix of my mom's cold tone, Pole's childish plea, and something darker beneath. The words oozed like poison, each syllable warped, unnatural. A demon. Julian? Such little imagination. When I'm done with you, You'll wish I was a demon. The voice fractured, cracking like glass, but I heard them all. Mom's reprimand, Hole's laugh, Dad's distant hum, his indifference, blending into one monstrous entity. I felt something primal rise within me. Despite my fear, another feeling now took over. Anger. Anger because I had no idea what I had ever done to deserve this. I called out again. I'm done running from you, whatever you are. A chill went through every fiber of my being. The face emerging from the crawlspace, dimly lit, was that grotesque, horrifying insult to everything I remembered about Hole. Her eyes had been blue. But not this blue. Not this unnaturally bright, icy blue. So bright they were almost white. Not these eyes, so full of all-consuming hatred, malice and pain. Her skin was pale, her lips red, but not this pale, not this red, like blood in the snow. Her mouth looked like it had been placed upside down, distended, and warped into a silent scream. Then came that malignant smile, a mocking imitation of the small and crooked smile I remembered. How'd I look? Not too bad, right? The voice hissed and growled. I guess I could have looked better if I wasn't dead. A horrible cackling laughter filled the small storage space. It took me all the strength in the world not to run away instantly. You are not my sister. My voice was shaking with uncertainty. She slowly approached, sat down, and began rummaging through the Christmas decorations. You remember when we used to decorate this place, don't you? Remember when you stepped on a glass ornament? It shattered, and you cried. I was there to comfort you. Wasn't I? How could I know these things if I wasn't your sister? Where were you, Julian, when I cried out in pain? I shook my head. I was there, Hole. My grandma's words echoed in my head. It knows you. It will turn everything you love into something ugly. I forced myself to face her. No, you liar. I remember. In the garden. I remember how we used to play and laugh. I remember how close we were. She laughed. Do you really? She threw a glass ornament at me and hissed. It shattered on the wall behind me. Remember when I hid in Grandma's house and you left me all alone? She cried out. My entire body shook. No, it's not what happened. You accidentally locked yourself in the playhouse. I remember. She slowly crawled towards me, her broken limbs making sick crackling noises as she slithered closer. Lies. Tears of blood streamed down her pale face. And what about the time you hurt Leo? I loved that toy. Julian, you couldn't take that, could you? I started scooting away from her. I apologized, didn't I? She moved in for the kill. You couldn't take that, Mom. And Dad loved me more than they ever loved you. They were afraid of you too. Did you know that? Her broken limbs continued cracking as she moved closer. Her monstrously pale face inched ever closer to mine. Bloody tears dripped down on the carpet below. You pushed me when we played in the forest behind our house. Pushed me down that steep hill. I lay there for so long and you just stood and watched me. She emitted a bone-piercing shriek. Half a cry, half an angry outburst. It hurt, Julian. It hurt so badly. She was close enough for me to feel the coldness radiating from her dead frame. The words left my lips in uncertain, doubting sobs. No, Hole, I couldn't have. That's not me. It was an accident. That can't be who I am. Her angry cries became louder. I was about to admit how much I had failed her. I was ready to apologize, to her, to Mom, Dad, and anyone who would listen. Ready for her to pass the final judgment and tear me apart. I just wanted it all to be over. Just when I felt I couldn't take it any longer, something in my pocket started burning. I took out the Polaroid. It trembled in my hands as I clutched it like a lifeline. It was all I had left of her, the real her. Not the pale, twisted thing that haunted me now, but the little girl who'd seen magic in every corner of the world. My fellow explorer, my Hole. I pressed the photo to my chest as if I could anchor myself to those moments. To her laughter, to who we used to be. Hole and I in the garden. Smiles on our faces, standing shoulder to shoulder beneath the tall sunflowers. Chasing rainbows, running wild like tigers. It seemed to take notice. Slowing its approach, I took out the crumbled drawings I had made for her too. I held all of it in front of me as a protective shield. Screaming at the top of my lungs. I loved my sister. She loved me. You are not her. I kept repeating those words again and again. Each time, More self-assured, less doubtful, it retreated slowly toward the darkness at the back of the storage space. Its loud cries slowed down into hurt whimpers. No longer as monstrous, no longer as threatening, now much more like a pitiful wailing. Amidst the chaos I heard a distant familiar voice call out, moving closer, zeroing in on me as the monstrous apparition continued its retreat. The door to the storage space opened. I heard my mom yell out, "Julian, what's happening here?" I just sat there, unable to move, unable to do much of anything but cry my eyes out. What must she think of me now? I thought, sitting alone in a dark room, screaming and crying out into the void. But then I felt her touch, her embrace, a closeness I hadn't felt from her for what seemed like ages. "Julian, please, you have to talk to me. This can't go on. Something is hurting you." Her voice now seemed different. No malice, no blame, no accusations, just concern and tenderness. "We don't talk much in this family." The words left my lips like a shaky whimper. She gently took my face in her hands and looked at me. "Sweetheart, you don't talk. I tried many times. Both your dad and I could sense there were things you wanted to say. But it seemed like the words always escaped you. Like you just had no way of telling us how you felt. We'd get into arguments about the way you were acting out, but it would always go nowhere. Don't you remember?" Tears welled up in her eyes. Then time passed, and, God forgive me, I guess we gave up. We never should have, but we did. We accepted that you didn't want to or didn't know how to talk about the things you were going through. You withdrew. It seemed to me you had eventually moved on. Although I guess, in my heart, I knew better. I wish you had, but you got accustomed to the burden you were carrying silently. Didn't you? Until it became too much. And it all just came crashing down on you. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "But you whispered things about me. It was my fault. What happened to Hope? I heard your whispers." She shook her head and wrapped her arms around me tighter. "Sometimes, we hear and see the things we think we deserve. It's true, I sometimes whisper to myself. That is my way of coping. But I would never blame you. How could I? It wasn't your fault. You were just a child. It was an accident. You two were playing around. And she fell. I should have sensed it. The guilt you were carrying around. I should have done more to get you to open up." The softness of her voice seeped through the slowly appearing cracks in the wall that had surrounded me. "Jules, Angel, I'm so sorry." I held her tightly. I had no more fight left in me. No more will to resist what I had been keeping inside for so long. I tried to put into words what I never had been able to. There are so many voices. So many whispers. I don't know what to believe anymore. She rubbed my back slowly, tenderly. When there are too many voices, all of them surrounding you, wanting your attention, listen to the ones who speak with kindness. Her soothing voice seemed to echo through the corners of the dark storage space, driving away the last remaining whispers. We sat there for a while, in blissful silence, among the neatly packed up and dusty Christmas decorations, the old-time weathered remains of my childhood sanctuary. As I looked over my mom's shoulder, trying to grasp everything that had happened, Hull's pale and horrifying apparition was gone. In its place, I saw my 10-year-old self, staring back at me, so small, so fragile, so hurt, slowly withering away, leaving behind only a fading memory of tigers, rainbows, and sunflowers. "My dear, are you awake?" Nikki Chambers had fallen asleep on her best friend's tombstone when she heard those strange words from a woman with an airy, almost velvety voice. She lifted her head from the granite to see the woman's low vamp, tawny slippers, and flowing green skirt. She couldn't lift her head more than a few inches, even though she had slept for hours. She grew more weary and weaker by the day, especially in the years since Lucas passed. He was the only person buried in Lamson Corner Cemetery in over a decade. She found it unfair that her best friend had only a flat tombstone that sat flush with the ground. The Johnston family had very little money for one. No services were held. They paid the groundskeeper to have him buried without any visible markers. They pretended that Lucas never withered away to 60 pounds and less than 6 T-cells. "No one takes you when you're gone," the velvety voice replied. To Nikki's surprise, the voice turned gruff and gravely. "You're left to wander here until everyone forgets your name. And eventually, you forget your own." A cruel breeze blasted over Nikki, lifting the orchids she scattered on Lucas's stone. The orchids circled her like a cyclone. She lifted her head a few inches higher to see the lady's thin, graying arms and waterfall of umber hair completely cover her face. "What do you want from me?" Nikki said weakly, now sitting completely upright. The lady said nothing, dress flowing in the breeze, orchids now circling her. Nikki had lost track of time. It was late in the afternoon, and gray clouds were blanketing the sky. She wondered if her parents, who thought her illness was her fault, cared how late she stayed out or if she withered away on Lucas's tombstone. A death she found preferable to dying within the walls of the place she once called home. "What do you want from me?" Nikki summoned the strength to scream, red hair flowing down her face, the purple blotches on her skin seeming to multiply. "I can help you remember who you are. Just, don't hurt me or this place. You will live, my dear," the lady bellowed, extending a gray hand to her shoulder, which felt an awful lot like play. "You will be one of two who remember." "One of two? What do you mean? If you make others remember, you will forget." "I don't understand." The woman stood motionless, wind tossing her umber hair. "My home is some ways down the road. I must go." Nikki blinked, and she was gone. Nikki blinked again, and she saw Lucas's frail body standing before her. He looked frailer than the last time she saw him. He was wearing the black and white suit and cross his parents buried him with. His face was no longer a deep shade of brown but grayer than the lady's clay skin. His eyelids drooping, his lips crooked. Before she could say his name, her best friend's head and limbs collapsed into the grass and dirt beneath them. "Beyond this life, a fog," the head said, its lips contorting into its chin. Nikki screamed louder than she ever had before, vomiting on her red hoodie, and darted as fast as she could to the front of the cemetery, not looking back as the head screamed again. "Beyond this life, a fog." Nearing the entrance, Nikki smelled something foul and started to convulse. It reeked like a putrid combination of rotten eggs and sulfur, much like the swamp she used to go to in summer camp. She started coughing profusely, a deep cough she felt in her ribs when a green mist rose from the earth and surrounded her. She resumed running, unsure of which direction she should run in, while the voice cackled. The mist grew increasingly thicker as Nikki smacked into a stone wall. She hollered and clutched her knees. The voice cackled once more, and the mist subsided. Nikki let out a scream that echoed out into the desolate road. She ran down the steep path that led to Milford Street. A large truck zoomed by Nikki, blaring its horn as she scampered inside the white edge lines. When Nikki was sure that no other cars were coming, she crossed the road and forced her violently shaking body down onto the curb. She couldn't grasp what horrifying thing she had seen but was almost sure it wasn't Lucas. Still, she couldn't erase the image of the screaming, severed head from her mind. Nor could she forget that lady with the flowing green dress. The doctor warned her that as the virus progressed and her immune system weakened, she might begin to hallucinate. Nikki blinked once and spotted the lady with the flowing green dress across the road, levitating over a pile of leaves. Though the woman stood a stone's throw away, she could barely discern her features. Her skin now looked as grayer than the rocky face of a mountain. Her eyes, now visible, were gray too, shining like iron. The woman opened her mouth, unleashing a thick, green cloud of smoke. The cloud billowed into the atmosphere, stretching the length of the road. Nikki felt her heart stop momentarily as the smoke formed the face of a laughing man, its jaws clamping down on the asphalt. "What do you want from me?" Nikki screamed. The face answered with a booming scream of its own. Nikki blinked twice, and the cloud disappeared. Nikki vomited once more on her hoodie. After the figure vanished, Nikki lost track of time and her surroundings. Over several minutes, she used the self-talk technique her therapist taught her, reminding herself that hallucinations were nothing more than that, no matter how real they looked. Once Nikki composed herself, she wiped the vomit from her hoodie. She grew weary from a massive migraine, forcing her brain to remember the last time she saw Lucas alive. It had been so long since she saw him in the flesh. But she needed to remember him as he was and drive the horrible, headless figure from her thoughts. First, she remembered his skin, a lovely shade of brown with dimples. A memory came to her of the first time they went out for coffee. Lucas joked about them being yin and yang friends, because she was so pale by comparison. Next, she remembered his deep brown eyes with hints of green that lit up a room and matched his goofy facial expressions. Finally, she remembered his pearly white smile, which he flashed no matter how sickly he grew. With all his features recalled, a memory came to her of a sweltering summer day a year and a half ago. He wasn't well, of course, but had all of his limbs attached. Nikki's mom dropped her off at the Waterbury Hospital. She took the elevator to the 3rd floor, which Lucas half-jokingly termed pre-hospice. Nikki and his cousin Savannah were the only ones who visited these days. His parents' hate the sin, love the sinner mentality kept them away for the past few months until he'd ask God forgiveness for his sinful ways. It was a warm summer afternoon when she saw him lying in his hospital bed. A cold, sterile island in the middle of the room, sketching a 5-lined skink. The skink lay in the palm of a pale, freckled hand. His obsession with lizards never ceased to amuse her, especially how he always dyed his mini dreads to match the color of his latest scaly favorite. She even bought him a lizard calendar, which stood upright on his table. June 1995 featured a Komodo dragon. Is that supposed to be me? Nikki said, tapping him on the shoulder. Holy shit, don't do that, he shrieked, pulling the sleeve of the hospital gown over his lesioned shoulder. Sorry, she said, kissing him on the cheek. Lucas blushed and continued to sketch. Hey, is that hand supposed to be mine? He smirked. Do you want it to be? It's pale and freckly. I'd sure hope it's mine. Then it's yours, Nikki Chambers. Or maybe it's your little brother. Colt is just as freckly. She giggled. Ew, I hope it's not his clammy 7-year-old hands. As Nikki gave her best Colt impression, she saw another person standing in the doorway. When they realized it was Savannah, Nikki and Lucas waved their arms wildly, cheered, and made obnoxious sounds like the characters in Pee-wee's Playhouse, their favorite TV show. Savannah laughed, adjusting her knotless braids behind her shoulders. She was still wearing her outfit from the summer theater program, a leafy, vine-patterned dress with small bells on the fringes. Nikki was happy for Savannah's opportunity to play the part of Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream. The sight of her glowing and healthy made her secretly sad as well. Knowing 3 of them could have shared the stage. A year ago, summer theater was their life. Nikki feared it would be their last summer together. I didn't even say the secret word. Lord, what fools these mortals be, Lucas said, standing atop his bed. He had the best stage pose but the worst British accent. Savannah giggled as Nikki joined him on the bed. If you can't be good, be careful. Guys, I just rehearsed these lines for the last hour. How now, spirit, whither wander you? Nikki said in an even worse British accent, extending a hand. After a moment of giggling, she hopped on top of the bed and joined them. You're going to make me do this? They nodded enthusiastically. Fine. Savannah rose and twirled around, which caused the twosome to cheer wildly again. Captain of our fairy band, Helena, is here at hand. As Nikki and Lucas exploded into applause, they fell onto the bed and kicked their legs into the air like they had done many times before. It felt so good to just exist for a moment without talking about their illness. It felt so right to roll around the bed sheets and close their eyes like they were at a sleepover again and not have to worry about not waking up. Skin to skin, face to face, they lived in the moment. Nikki hoped that, for once, her mom would forget to pick her up. Nikki hoped that, for once, Savannah's mom forgot, too, and they could stay with Lucas as long as he needed them. At least Lucas looked more full of life than he had in the years since his diagnosis. At least Nikki felt more alive in the years since her diagnosis. If we stay still, do you think our parents will notice we're here? She said to Savannah, not thinking about Lucas's feelings at that moment. Maybe their vision is based on movement. Savannah added, forcing her limbs still. Your parents aren't Jurassic Park dinosaurs. And at least they give a shit. Lucas rose from the bed and plodded to the window. Standing in his hospital oversized gown, reality set in again. I'm sorry to sound dramatic, guys, but at least you have parents to go home to. Mine just left me here like a fucking pound dog. I know how it is, Nikki said faintly. I have it, too. Yes, he said coldly. We both have the same virus. But your parents have a little bit of money. And when your time comes, they won't leave you there. Lucas, Savannah said faintly. The girls walked over to the window and wrapped their arms around his frail body, sobbing with him while simultaneously trying to shush him and tell him that they were there. You know what? Savannah said. Fuck them. Yeah, fuck them. Nikki shouted. Fuck your stupid parents. And they're missing out on a damn good dog. They froze for a moment before bursting out into laughter to the point of doubling over. Hospital visits were like this every time, with incredible highs, sorrowful lows, and incredibly offensive jokes that left them in stitches. These visits, these emotional roller coaster rides, were painfully exhausting and simultaneously euphoric. For Nikki, it almost felt like they were crossing off items from a bucket list before Armageddon or some cataclysmic event ended the world. When the laughter and the tears subsided, Lucas cracked his window open. Guys, look, it's a 5-line skink. I don't see anything. Nikki and Savannah leaned out the window and shrugged as he pointed to a blotchy spot on the brick tiling. How could you not? There's so many of them. We don't see anything, Savannah said, attempting to pull him away. Lucas tried to force himself free but didn't have the strength. So instead, he leaned even further and pointed joyfully. They're crawling up the wall. And they're so big. Oh my God. They're coming closer. Savannah stepped aside and whispered to Nikki that she was going to find a nurse. This is crazy. They're talking. The skinks are talking. How can that be? How can that be? Lucas, Nikki said hoarsely, trying to pull his body away. She was almost as frail as him and only a fraction of his size. You're not feeling well. How can you not hear them? They're saying, we're just a memory like you. We're just a memory like you. What do they mean? Nikki, what do they mean? Tell me you can hear this. Tell me, I'm not a memory. I'm not a fucking memory. As Lucas screamed, Nikki began to whimper, her arms still tight around him. Savannah rushed into the room with a towering, muscular nurse with a busket who lifted Lucas away from her like a gardener pulling the last weed from his garden. He motioned for Nikki and Savannah to step outside, and Lucas continued to scream. A few more nurses entered the room, along with the doctor. He's not well. You must go, the muscular nurse shouted. Go. Before Savannah and Nikki could move, he put his 2 meaty hands on their shoulders and steered them out the door as the team rushed into action. They could only look helplessly at the shadows from the tinted window as the shouting continued. Through the walls, they could hear him scream, "A memory just like me. A memory just like me." The girls huddled together, moving as far down the hallway as they could. Their bodies were shaking. Their vision was locked on the distant elevator. They almost didn't see their little brothers, Darius and Colt, coming up beside them, carrying yellow bags with the words Blockbuster Night on them. Mom's been waiting in the car for you forever, Colt nagged, nudging Darius, who was a half-foot taller than him. Darius chuckled and nudged him back. Savvy, your mom is working late, so you're coming home with us for pizza and movies. Okay, Savannah said faintly, scratching the back of her arm. Sure thing. Nikki followed, her eyes darting back to Lucas's door, which was eerily silent. You guys okay? Darius said with a fat Tootsie Pop in his fingers. She nudged Colt between licks, who nudged him back even harder and slapped him on the back. What? You're just letting him call you savvy. You hate that. I think we better go home. Savannah said, I have a severe headache. You can lay down in my bed. As they headed to the elevator, Nikki glanced back at Lucas's room, which, for some reason, appeared blurry and hazy. She blinked twice, and the room came into focus. She sighed with relief until she noticed the number beside the room had disappeared along with the patient card in the slot next to the door. All of a sudden, she couldn't remember the words Lucas shouted or why he was shouting. To begin with, for years, this memory would burn into a hazy oblivion. The day she saw Lucas in the cemetery. However, it burned quite clearly. She convinced herself the figure wasn't him. The Lucas she had known since childhood was always a light in her otherwise dreary life. With Savannah gone for a semester abroad in Scotland, her annoying little brother Colt was the only one left who treated her as a person. At least when she came home from the cemetery, he was at the door to greet her while her parents stewed quietly in the kitchen. Even though she wasn't dead yet, she was always a ghost to them. Sure, they brought her to the hospital for treatments, but it felt more out of obligation than anything else. Hey, Sticky Nicky, Colt, plump as ever, said as she entered the front door to the living room. He was holding a can of cherry Coke and started skipping and singing as she stepped inside. Sticky Nicky. Sticky Nicky. She's so sticky. She's so icky. What? You're not gonna smack me? Not today. Pig boy. I hate it when you call me that, the pesky 8-year-old said, slapping her waist. Hey, wait, your face is red. Are you sad or something? I am, she said, plopping down on the gray sectional. She could smell something meaty cooking in the kitchen where her parents spoke of whispers. Colt plopped down next to her. Nicky groaned and slid over to the other pillow. Is this 'cause you're sick? No, pig boy. I feel okay today. Is this about your dead friend? She raised a hand to slap him, stopping at his forehead as he formed an arm barrier. His name is Lucas, and how did you know? I hear you talking about him in your sleep sometimes. Did you go to that spooky cemetery and visit him again? Yes. How did you know? Mom and Dad say you do that sometimes. They could drop me off once in a while, she said loud enough for them to hear in the kitchen. And why did you say it's spooky? Well, someone at school says the green lady lives in that cemetery. The what? Nicky felt her fingers grow numb and her body shiver. She's creepy, he shouted, spritzing his soda into the air. Nicky winced and squirmed as droplets trickled onto her. I heard about it from this older kid at school. He said she's like a ghost named Elizabeth, or something. And she's like hundreds of years old. They said she drowned in this swamp in this really big snowstorm looking for a man. Like her husband? Colt paused to think and remember the rest of the story. He looked surprised to have captured his sister's attention. He said she was already really sick and had tuberculosis or something. Tuberculosis? Yeah, that's it. Anyways, he said she haunts the cemetery you go to and this other cemetery on Covey Road. He said she forgot her name, or maybe it was her husband's name. Husband. Colt. He shrugged. Whatever. Sticky Nicky. That's the story. Be careful when you go there. Colt kissed her on the cheek. And he skipped off, singing, Sticky Nicky, Sticky Nicky. She's so sticky, she's so icky. As Colt skipped out of sight, she heard a cold voice from the kitchen calling her name. Nicky, can you come into the kitchen for a moment? Nicky sighed and traipsed into the kitchen, where her mom leaned over the faucet, tending to her plant on the windowsill. Her father had already left for his overnight shift at the power plant. Even though her mother stood feet away from her, she felt miles away, the distance growing further with each passing day. Nicky could barely stand to look at her without becoming sad. She looked like an older version of Nicky with gray streaks in her strawberry blonde hair. She vowed never to become as cold as her mother if she lived long enough to have a child. Mom, what is it? Nicky took a seat at the rustic table, exhaling deeply. Mom, your doctor called. He said there are protease inhibitors available for you to take. What are those? Her mother tightened her fists and groaned. Must you ask so many questions? Apparently, people with your condition live longer. Oh, she felt her heart rise rapidly in her chest as the words, live longer, were spoken. She didn't think living longer was a possibility and even planned out her funeral. Even knowing her parents wouldn't have one the way she wanted. That's great. When can I go? Goddammit, I'm not sure. Maybe next week if I have time. Nicky's chest tightened as her mother groaned once more, pretending to fix the roots of her daisies. Why do you hate me? This stopped her mother in her tracks. She slowly turned around, wiping gray strands from her eyes. Sweetheart, I don't hate you. I hate your actions. So, you think I deserve this? Don't you dare turn back around. Silence was all her mom had to give as Nicky rose from her seat and stood face to face with her. They shared the same shamrock green eyes, but her mom's were an icier shade. Her mother began to shake as Nicky stepped closer. I'm sick of the way you and Dad have treated me for the past year. You assume I got it on my own. And honestly, if I did, who cares? You should still love your daughter no matter what. If you bothered to ask, you would have known it wasn't my choice. I had no say. Did you know that, mother? Or did you just assume? Tears welled up in her mother's eyes as she stepped even closer. It was the first time she had seen any emotion from her mother in over a year. It was the first time she told the full truth about her illness. She was disgusted by the fact that only now her mother seemed to care. Only now that she learned the truth did her mother treat her as a human being. Only now did her mother treat her as a daughter again. Sweetheart, Do you mean? Nikki nodded, clenching a fist, stepping even closer, watching her mother's frail body tremble. Sweetheart, Nikki's mom attempted to wrap her arms around her. Nikki pushed them aside. The way I got it shouldn't matter. You should love your daughter anyway. I should have let you keep thinking I got it the way Lucas did. You would have continued to hate me. But it would have shown me exactly who you are. With her head cast down, her mother began to sob quietly. You should have told me. Honey, you should have loved me enough to ask. With those words, Nikki stormed out of the kitchen into the driveway, not caring if her mother followed her. If she saw that woman's face again, she might have struck it or worse. If father arrived at the same time, she would have given him a piece of her mind as well. Gone were the days when she suffered in silence. Gone were the days when she let them treat her as a pariah. As Nikki started toward the street, a sudden burst of green mist enveloped her. Nikki glanced around nervously as the mist grew thicker. Somewhere in the mist, she heard the sound of laughter from her mother's voice. She heard her mother's voice scream, "I hate your actions," followed by her awful sobs. The mist was thick, cutting against her vision. As she closed her eyes, she heard Lucas's voice screaming, "We're a memory just like you." She heard Lucas's voice screaming, "Beyond this life." A fog. Nikki opened her mouth to scream. But the mist, now as thick as noxious gas, seeped its way inside her throat. Nikki coughed profusely as the mist drifted deeper down inside her. Just when Nikki thought she would choke to death on this awful substance, the mist subsided. Before her stood the Green Lady, umber hair completely covering her face, her skin even more putrid than before with missing spots in its gray exterior. Her green dress was the color of a swamp and smelled like one, too, with flies swarming around it. When the Green Lady opened her mouth, an awful stench came out, making Nikki convulse. This is the price of living. My dear, you will live and be one of two who remember. Remember what? Nikki asked faintly. What do you mean by one of two? The Green Lady's head twisted around her shoulders, coming loose at the neck, with rotting bones from her vertebrae puncturing outward. Nikki willed herself to run but couldn't. Nikki willed herself to scream, but she couldn't do that either. When the Green Lady's head came all the way around, she saw Lucas's face. It looked just like him except for its black eyes and blood-blue lips. Nikki willed herself to reach out and strike its face, knowing now it wasn't him. But just as quickly as she saw its awful features, the face and body of the Green Lady disappeared into another cloud of mist that drifted down the street to its eternal resting place. The Green Lady's words haunted Nikki for nearly 20 years. She learned the price of living when the protease inhibitors allowed her to live a life she never dreamed of having. With her T-cell count restored and her viral load undetectable, Nikki lived long and well enough to attend college, marry a handsome young teacher named Carl, and even have two beautiful daughters who were born without the virus. Nikki lived life beyond her wildest dreams, secretly wondering if she deserved it. When she took over her uncle's bookstore in Winsted, Serpent Scrolls, she recalled joking with Lucas about owning the store one day when their acting careers failed. On a cold, frigid day in January, she wondered if Lucas deserved her life instead. She tried hard not to show her sadness to Jonah, her best friend's son, and one of just two customers on a Thursday afternoon. Luckily, he was browsing a table of the latest graphic novels with Groucho, a plump gray cat with one yellow eye and one blue eye. The young woman in the back aisle methodically browsed the nonfiction section. "So the cat lives here now?" Jonah giggled, picking up a robot superhero book while Groucho rubbed against his legs. "No, he just follows me, Jonah. He slept here again last night. Your parents were worried sick." From behind the counter, Nikki counted a few bills and drew the blinds over the storefront windows. The shopkeeper's bells sounded as Savannah and Carl entered the store. Carrying their briefcases, Nikki stepped out to greet Carl, who pulled her into his peacoat with a passionate kiss, which caught her off guard. Savannah scooped up Jonah and Groucho in one arm to kiss them, too. Nikki was impressed she could still do that with an 8-year-old. Normally, the sight of them would have filled her heart with joy. Today, for some reason, she felt the longing to be alone. "What was that for?" Nikki said as Carl kissed her again. From behind the counter, she saw the young woman browsing the same 3 books. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Do you need help finding anything? We're about to close soon? Ma'am? Okay, I guess not. We were stuck in that long PD for hours. If I hear one more thing about student data, I swear. Savannah groaned, and Jonah chased the cat around the store. Jonah, don't let Groucho play with that. What is that? It's fine, Nikki said. We sell koosh balls now. You know, those balls made of rubber strands that Lucas, you, and I used to play with in the 90s. I'm sorry. Who? Savannah said in the nonfiction aisle with Jonah and the cat. The young woman looked up from her book about wetlands and smiled. Lucas. Wait, you're kidding, right? I know we haven't talked about him in a while. But, Savannah groaned as Jonah threw the koosh ball over the cat's head toward the emergency exit. Jonah, oh, goddammit. The ball bounced toward the young woman's leg. Still peering into her book, she picked up the koosh ball and handed it to him, adjusting her long, green puffer coat. Thanks, green lady, Jonah shouted as he and the cat ran to the front of the store, sending jolts down Nikki's spine. Groucho doesn't catch too well. The lady nodded. I'm sorry about that. Savannah bent over to Jonah and spoke in a hushed tone. Jonah, that was rude. That woman has a name. I know. Her name is Green Lady. Jonah said jovially. The woman didn't have a response. Savannah groaned again, whisking him to the front of the store. We'll talk about this in the car, she said as Jonah picked up Groucho, who made chirping sounds. I'm sorry. The move last month and the new job have got us all in a weird mood. You don't need to apologize, Carl said, smiling. Jonah's adjusting fine to his new school, and I've never heard this many students excited about a stats class. Hun, what's wrong? Nikki couldn't take her eyes off the woman, stumbling her way to the counter with her book. Groucho couldn't either as he hissed in her direction. The woman didn't respond. Don't hiss at the green lady, Jonah said, tugging on Groucho's collar. I'm sorry if Jonah or his fluffy friend, number. It's not that. You said that you didn't remember who Lucas was. Carl, you're making a face like you don't either. I told you about him. I must have. Carl shrugged and shook his head. Savannah mirrored him. Sorry, hun. I believe you. I just don't remember Lucas. Tears welled in Nikki's eyes as she said softly. He was our best friend. Groucho hissed again at the woman as umber hair fell over her eyes. I'm going to take them. I'll see you tomorrow. Savannah sighed, hugged her before rushing her son and cat out the door. You don't remember me talking about him? She asked softly. Carl hugged her and kissed her on his forehead. Okay, I just thought that. Never mind. Your mom is probably getting tired of watching Pocahontas with Ruby for the millionth time or playing Trolls with Ella. I'll lock up. You sure? She smiled and kissed him as the woman appeared in front of the counter. Carl grimaced at the sight of her before rushing out the door. Did you find everything you were looking for? The woman flashed her a crooked smile, showing yellow teeth. It's the funniest thing, the woman said as she laid the book about wetlands on the counter. No matter how long I look at this book, I can't seem to remember what swamp I drowned in. What did you say? Nikki started to tremble as a green cloud of mist escaped the woman's mouth. I can't remember what swamp I drowned in, her voice said as the thick fog covered every inch of the store, causing Nikki to convulse the way she hadn't in many years. Just like your friends and family can't remember that best friend of yours. What do you want from me? Nikki screamed. She could hear the green lady's laughter bouncing off the walls. What have you done? Everyone remembers Benjamin Palmiter, the voice shrieked, reverberating throughout the mist. There's no need for them to remember his great nephew. Nikki struggled to shut her eyes as the mist formed the faces of her friends and family. Carl's face twisted to her left with deep black eyes and a deeper shade of black over its mouth. Savannah and Jonah's faces twisted to her right with frosty eyes and mouths that spun and cackled, unleashing smoke that shimmered like an icicle. Groucho's face came straight toward her, a deep shade of gray, his once beautiful eyes now the color of soot. Groucho yowled, increasing the size of each face, stretching from the ground to the ceiling. The faces yowled in unison, swarming around Nikki until she grew dizzy and dropped to the floor. When Nikki awoke, she grasped her hand to her chest, panting rapidly, thrusting her arms to gain her bearings. For some reason, she felt glass. For some reason, her chest pressed against a horn. She was in her car. Why was she in her car? She peered out the window. realizing she was in the parking spot across the street from her store. How had she gotten there? When had she gotten there? Nikki pulled her phone out and realized it was 8 o'clock. Several missed calls from Carl flashed across her screen. A few calls from Savannah preceded them. Nikki frantically pressed his icon as the phone connected to the car's speakers. Hello? Hun. Where are you? I thought you were going to lock up hours ago. I'm sorry. I'm in my car. I think I fell asleep. Maybe you should call your doctor. You know, to see how the new medication is affecting you. Yeah? Nikki scratched her head as Carl apologized for not remembering Lucas. Not even a moment passed before a text flashed across her screen from Savannah apologizing about the same thing. Another text followed asking if she was upset. Look, I'll be home soon. Send my love to the girls. After Nikki hung up, she frantically scrolled through her contacts to see if she could find anyone who remembered Lucas. In 20 years, however, Nikki lost touch with most of her friends from grade school. She thought about contacting them on social media but barely used those platforms. When she came across her brother's name, she figured it was worth a shot. After a few rings, Colt picked up in a tizzy. Someone was yelling in the background. Hi, sis. This isn't the best time. I don't know why you dragged me out here. Sorry, that wasn't to you. That's okay. Where are you? Darius dragged me out to his grandmother's place. You know, the one in Burlington that was left to his family. I don't think there's a swamp back there. It's 8 o'clock at night, sorry. He's so annoying. I thought you guys broke. Never mind. Why are you helping him look for a swamp in Burlington? Yeah, we did. I don't know why I'm here. It's complicated. He said he kept having these dreams. Maybe this will stop him. It's 8 at night. Why are we in these woods? I'm sorry. Nikki, why did you call? Be careful. I just wanted to know if you remembered my old friend Lucas from long ago. I'm sorry. I don't remember any of your friends named Lucas. She's talking about someone named Lucas. What do you mean he was your cousin? I'll put him on the phone. Hello, Nikki. You said something about my cousin Lucas? You remember? Okay, that's weird. Your sister doesn't. And apparently, my brother doesn't either. That's so strange. I was talking to my mom the other day about him. She doesn't remember either. I know his parents moved to Florida after he died. But, hold on. There it is. Colt. There's the swamp. Sorry, I know this is crazy. But I've been dreaming about this swamp lately. I think it's near Grandma Johnston's bungalow. Or at least, that's what the family said growing up. Why do you? Before she could finish her sentence, the Green Lady's words from long ago echoed through her mind. You will be one of two who remember. Hey, Darius, do you know anything about a man named Benjamin Palmiter? A long silence passed before Darius spoke again. Sorry, it's dark out here, and we only have one flashlight. He was my great uncle. Lucas talked about him before he died. It was something about the place he was going to be buried. Awfully dark stuff to tell a little kid. Come to think of it, I think this swamp is near the— Wait. Colt, do you hear that? Colt, I'll be right back. Darius, are you there? Are you guys okay? There's this really weird green mist. I think we should. The phone clicked. Nikki tried calling back, but her brother's number went to voicemail. She called Darius' number 2, with the same result. She sent a text to Savannah and Carl that something was wrong with Colt and Darius. The message failed to send. She tried several more times before calling them. She reached their voicemails and nothing more. She plugged his grandmother's street name into her Maps application. It was all she could remember. Come on. Damn it. When the app and route finally loaded, Nikki sped toward US 44E, a 2-lane highway that led to Burlington. She attempted to call Carl and Savannah several more times. Reaching voicemail immediately, she called Savannah's husband with the same result. Save for a few cars, Nikki's was the only one on the highway that night. After checking the app for nearby speed traps, she accelerated well over the recommended speed limit, something she hadn't done since high school. As Nikki drove, a green mist surrounded her vehicle, blanketing the road from both sides. She found herself drifting over the edge lines, Pac-Manning them as Savannah used to call it. She laughed and remembered that Lucas termed the phrase on an impromptu, unlicensed road trip they took to Rhode Island. Having only his learner's permit, he wasn't a good driver. Frequently, Pac-Manning the edge lines. For some reason, as Nikki laughed, the mist began to disappear. Nikki thought of a time shortly after when they went to a local arcade and played the original Pac-Man, calling it a simulation of the Lucas Johnston driving experience. Laughing to herself even harder, Nikki gleamed as the mist dissipated to a dull glow. "I found your kryptonite, bitch," Nikki yelled, rolling the windows down. The green mist attempted to morph into a face, but it was much too weak enough for her vehicle to plow through, spreading its particles into the frigid night sky. She kept a steady speed as she turned onto Steel Road in New Hartford, a seemingly endless route with very few streetlights that wound past groves of trees and nestled houses. As the green mist filtered through the trees, she remembered teaching Colt to drive on the same road and laughing at how happy and melodramatic he was. With a mere giggle, the mist retreated into the trees. She willed herself not to think of her brother and Darius in the swamp. When she couldn't, a thick, green fog floated over the road. As she neared Grandma Johnston's blue bungalow, the fog thickened, taking the shape of an elephant-sized, five-lined skink. The skink smashed its tail into the car, spraying green vapor inside. Coughing hysterically, Nikki pulled onto the curb, forcing her body onto the street, face to face with the giant skink. Nikki laughed as its gray eyes shined like iron through the fog. The skink snaked its body toward her, revealing a mouth of conical, gator-like teeth. Nikki laughed again as the skink snapped its jaw at her head. Nikki and the skink repeated the laugh and snap movements until she realized something she actually could laugh about. Lucas would find a giant skink equally terrifying and hilarious. The thought of Lucas trying to tame the skink amused her, causing the figure to break from its jaw down to its tail, exploding into a giant vapor cloud that showered the street. "You don't own my fears anymore," Nikki's words carried into the night. After the vapor evaporated, she carried every aching inch of her body up the street and onto the property of the ramshackle house. Two distant screams drifted from the backyard. She couldn't tell if it was them or another illusion from the Green Lady. Upon the screams intensifying, she ran into the backyard, which was overgrown by wild vines and invasive shrubbery. She felt as if she was playing a madman's game of Twister, contorting her hands and feet through the shrubs and vines, seemingly scraping every inch of exposed skin. She heard screams again, which sounded inhumane, punctuated with staccato yips. The screams punctured her eardrums. The awful scent of rotten eggs and sulfur punctured her nostrils as she found herself knee-deep in murky water. Ahead of her lay a stream of murky water with cypress trees whose gnarled roots rose from the water like skeletal fingers. The roots created a maze of shadowed pathways beneath a canopy of thick, moss-draped branches. The air hung heavy with the stench of decaying vegetation. As Nikki trudged forward, she realized how eerily quiet the swamp was, disturbed only by the low hum of unseen insects. A hazy silhouette loomed in the distance, the sight of which paused Nikki's breathing. Though the figure swayed above the water, it made nary a ripple. Nearing the figure, she noticed its human form, towering at least a foot above her. Creeping closer, she gasped at the figure's frail frame, covered head to toe in algae. She sobbed quietly as she heard its groaning. "Lucas?" The figure croaked with the nearby bullfrogs. "I don't know what to say. It's been too." The figure croaked again, almost sounding like a gurgle. "Are you okay?" The figure shook its head. Why are you here?" A long snarl elapsed before the figure croaked. "I'm here until they remember." She bit her lip, sobbing and shaking. "How can I help you? How can I make them remember? Where can I find my..." An even louder, longer gurgle elapsed before the figure thrashed its arm outward, croaking, "Follow the Green Lady." Nikki threw her arms around the figure, which felt so human beneath the algae, so much like Lucas felt all those years ago. "I've missed you so much. Follow the Green Lady." The figure croaked again, one arm wrapping around her waist, the other still pointing downstream. "Make them remember. Make her remember." "I will," she said between sobs. The figure sank from Nikki's arms beneath the swamp. Though the water floated only a few feet deep, she saw the figure drifting miles below the muck into some ungodly world. Taking in her reflection, she blinked once and saw Lucas in the flesh standing beside her, flashing a smile so pearly white that it glowed in the nighttime. Lucas looked well and older. Perhaps as old as Nicky now. He looked the same except for a tinge of gray in his dyed mini-dreads. She blinked again and saw Colt and Darius lying at the foot of a defaced gravestone. Glancing up, she saw the lady standing downstream, her skirt as sparkly as the day she first laid eyes on it. She hovered above the water at a point where the swamp stopped, and the hollow woods began. Trudging onward, the murky water rose to her waist. The lady's dress shimmered in the moonlight. Nicky shivered as two figures raced toward her, taking the shape of Colt and Darius. Unlike the other apparitions, they weren't made from mist or fog. She kept her distance, unsure of how real they were. "Nicky!" Colt shouted. She felt certain it was him by his curly black hair and shirt with the quote, "Everyone deserves a chance to fly," from his favorite musical. "Are you okay?" Darius called. She felt certain it was him by his striking resemblance to his cousin, especially his big hazel eyes. The two of them were too real, too put together to be apparitions. "Guys," she called back. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Colt and Darius stopped dead in their tracks. "What's wrong?" "It's like we're stuck," Colt said. Darius nodded. Both were completely unfazed by their predicament. "Why don't you come over here?" "That's okay. You can't find her without crossing this way," one of them said. "What?" Darius and Colt were furiously scratching the back of their necks. "Please help. There are so many mosquitoes out here. They're so itchy." Nicky stopped dead in her tracks, too, as they scratched more intensely, their fingers digging deeper and deeper into their necks, blood spouting through the crevices. Nicky forced herself not to scream as the figures' heads plopped into the water, blood exploding like a geyser from their necks. Nicky covered her mouth as the two heads floated and began to laugh maniacally. "Beyond this life, a fog," the Colt head shouted. "When we die, you will be the only one who remembers us," the Darius head cackled back. "When everyone you have ever loved perishes, you will be the only one who remembers." As both the heads cackled, Nicky forced herself to cackle back, remembering everything that ever made her laugh. Her dad losing his toupee in Disney World when she was 10. A preschool-aged Ruby bringing home a duck from the pond. Ella finger-painting Carl's face when he was sound asleep. Little by little, the heads turned to bits of green fog. Carl's fear of Ferris wheels on their first date. Savannah chasing Jonah and Groucho through his elementary school. Amusing moments made the heads burst into green vapor, its remnants drifting back through the wintry woods where the Green Lady wandered. "I told you, you don't own my fear anymore." Nicky sprinted through the skeletal woods, sliding on an icy blanket of snow toward the distant green shimmer. The faster she ran, the more voices she heard, echoing cruel memories from her past. "Sweetheart, I don't hate you, I hate your actions," a voice echoed from her left. "I'm not a memory," a voice echoed above the trees. "Nicky, just try it once. Come on, honey," a sinister male voice echoed from below. She hadn't heard that voice in a long time. Even though she knew it wasn't real, she still shivered, sprinting into a thorned bush. Stopping herself mid-holler, she glanced up to find a translucent cloud of smoke, a window to a distant past. Within the cloud, she saw the lady in mortal form, running through the skeletal woods in her vamp, tawny slippers and flowing green skirt with an oil lantern. "Benjamin," the woman cried, coughing into her puffy sleeve. "My dearest, whither dost thou wander?" The lady stopped mid-run to cough again, this time spraying blood. Below her foot stood a tiny creature, no more than a foot tall, with white horns, clay skin, and black eyes. As the lady knelt to catch her breath, the creature glanced up at her. "What manner of foul creature art thou?" The lady spoke in labored breaths, the creature's black eyes beaming into hers. "Hast thou come hither to claim my life? Thou shalt proceed no further. Thy husband shall not come forth to rescue thee. Thou shalt perish from the chill whilst I shall dwell within thee as thou roamest this earth in solitude." The lady gasped. "Begone, thou vile creature, I shall do no such thing." The creature cackled. "Thou shalt traverse this earthly realm bearing a blight which can only be lifted should these stipulations be fulfilled. Thou must cause all save two to forget thy husband's eminent nephew. And thou must discover a vessel that shares thine affliction, for me to dwell within." The lady shivered. "A malediction? I beg your pardon." I comprehend not. I am a woman of virtue and divinity. Why wouldst thou lay such a curse upon me? I must persist in existence. There must indeed be an alternative. The creature unleashed another earth-shattering cackle. There exists yet another manner. A soul must recollect thy name, lest thou forget thine own. Yet none shall do so. Now, I bid thee, open wide. The lady's eyes opened as wide as saucers while the creature pried her jaw open. A loud crack rang out as the creature crawled inside. The translucent cloud vanished. Too terrified to scream, Nikki finally understood what the lady wanted from her. Nikki finally understood why only she and Darius recalled Lucas's existence. She feared the thought, however, of following the lady any further. Just the idea of that creature crawling inside her made her equally repulsed and horrified beyond repair. The thought of Lucas, doomed to that wretched swamp, was enough for her to carry on. Sprinting onward, Nikki couldn't see even the faintest glow of green. Somehow, she knew that her brother and Darius were nearby. The skeletal woods stopped abruptly at an open patch of land lined by a stone wall that snaked horizontally around the land. Several small, upright rectangular stones pierced through the snow. She found Colt and Darius face down in the snow by a fragmented stone marker. "Guys, it's a trap," Colt said weakly. "Don't come any," from the stone. A thick, green fog emerged that muffled Darius' words. Before her stood the lady, extending her clay arms toward Nikki's mouth. Nikki clenched her jaw tighter than a clam. The lady opened her jaw like an alligator about to snap its prey. As the lady's jaw unnaturally widened, she saw the foul creature with its glistening black eyes and ivory horns emerging from its head to form a semicircle. "Now, I bid thee, open wide," the creature snarled, with the lady's clay hands tied upon her jaw. A memory to Nikki from long ago. Young Colt recounting the Green Lady story he heard from an older boy at school. "Colt, what's her name?" Nikki cried as the lady's clay finger reached inside her jaw. Yanking it upward, Nikki bit into the clay, causing the foul creature to snarl and howl, stumbling backward into her stone. "Elizabeth Palmiter," he said weakly. "Elizabeth Palmiter," Nikki screamed. "Your name is Elizabeth Palmiter." With an earth-shattering snarl, the foul creature slid from Elizabeth's elongated jaw into a puddle of slush. Her skin was no longer clay-colored but pale with freckles. Her eyes were no longer gray but shamrock green like Nikki's. "I remember now," Elizabeth said as she faded into a final swirl of green fog. "They will remember too." The foul creature trampled the snow toward Colt and Darius, its talons scraping against the crumpled leaves. Nikki kicked the creature with the vamp of her boots. It darted toward the skeletal woods. Colt and Darius suddenly rose to their feet as if a bolt of lightning had jolted them to consciousness. "Kill it before it finds someone else," Colt shouted. "How?" Nikki felt her heart in her throat, her jaw still pulsating with traces of clay she spit into the snow. "I don't even know what." "There's no time," Darius said, darting toward the woods. "It will find another host." The three of them raced through the snow as the foul creature bounded over fallen branches, shedding clumps of clay in its trail to the swamp. Nikki picked up a few chunks of clay and hurled it at the creature. Colt and Darius did the same. With each throw, the creature dodged or kicked the pieces back at them. When the creature reached the swamp, Nikki saw lights illuminating the water. They were coming from the bungalow. She pulled out her phone to see 2 missed calls from Savannah and Carl and a text indicating they would be there in 20 minutes. This was 20 minutes ago. Despite hours having passed since her arrival, Nikki motioned for them to follow her as the creature bounded over floating lily pads and algae, cackling and snarling the words, "A vessel I shall seek within." She kicked the creature's horns and missed, splashing murky water onto Darius. Nikki rose and kicked again, this time clipping its horns. The creature snarled once more before an algae-laden hand pulled it underneath the water. One more submerged cackle reverberated, and then, there were only ripples. From the swamp emerged the figure covered head to toe in algae. The figure stood tall, taller than it had before, shedding the algae from its skin. The three of them gasped as the algae gave way for a teenage boy wearing a black and white suit and a cross. He no longer looked frail. The purple blotches that once plagued his skin were gone. "Thank you for remembering," he whispered. "I love you all," while they stood stunned and wordless. The figure turned around, fading into a lovely swirl of white fog. For what seemed like an eternity, they remained stunned and wordless before they saw Carl trudging through the swamp, shining an LED flashlight. "What the hell are you guys doing out here?" They couldn't find the words as Carl hugged them and led them back to the bungalow. They were surprised to find their entire family in the living room. Even though they were covered in murk, their family tightly embraced them. Savannah's face was drenched in tears. Miles, Savannah's husband, hugged her just as tightly. Ruby, Ella, and Jonah pointed excitedly to a photo album lying on the boomerang sofa. "I'm so glad you're okay," Savannah said, squeezing Nikki tightly. "I'm sorry I ever forgot him. Look what Auntie Savvy found," Ruby and Ella said, leading their mom to the album. "We saw you when you were little, Mommy." Ruby snatched the album from Jonah, who was lying with Groucho on his lap. After freshening up, Savannah sat down next to Nikki as the girls plopped on her knees. Jonah and Groucho peered over Nikki's shoulder as she opened the album. Darius, Colt, Miles, and Carl gathered around them, commenting on this unique discovery. Nikki excitedly opened the album to find pictures of her and Savannah as children at Grandma Johnston's house. The album was chock full of photographs from their childhood playing hopscotch, dyeing eggs on Easter, and swimming in the pool. As she turned the page, her mind felt foggy when she came upon a photograph of a dark-skinned boy standing with Savannah and Nikki at the entrance of the Beardsley Zoo. She scratched her head, turning to the next page. The same boy was smiling from ear to ear, holding an iguana. Lucas loved his lizards, Savannah said between soft sobs. "Look at that smile." "I'm sorry," Nikki mumbled, her mind growing increasingly foggy. "I don't seem to remember him." This untold story goes back 56 years to 1968 when I was just 8 years old. The year now is 2024 and I am 64 years old. My name is Betsy Lancaster and unfortunately, I have been recently diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. All the more reason for me to document this tale on my laptop before I lose access to my long-term memory. I've never told anybody about what happened all those years ago, not even my husband of 37 years. This is very difficult for me to recall the events that would eventually haunt me the rest of my life. So it started back when my father built me a large sandbox to play in behind our garage on our property in Stillwater, Oklahoma. At 8 years of age, I swear the square wood-framed sandbox appeared to be the size of a large shed, but in actuality it was about 10 foot by 10 foot. I remember watching my father building the frame and not telling me what it was. I would hand him the hammer and hand him nails one at a time from the nail pouch that was strapped around my waist. I was always Daddy's little helper. I remember I kept guessing what it was, but he wouldn't tell me. I thought it was a frame for our vegetable garden at the time. At the four corners of the square frame he attached triangle-shaped seats. Finally, when my father returned with a truckload of play sand, I realized it was my very first sandbox. The sand was clean and fine. I can recall picking up my first handful of the soft sand and letting it sift through my fingers. After the sandbox was filled with sand, I ran over to grab my two best friends on Huckleberry Lane, Billy and Joey. Billy lived 2 houses down to our left. Joey lived 5 houses down on the opposite end of our street. They were both my age and in the same grade. During that summer of 1968 we played in that sandbox almost every day. Soon the sandbox was populated with digging and sifting tools along with sand pails and plastic shovels. The boys brought their Tonka trucks, Hot Wheels cars and small plastic green army action figures along with tanks and artillery guns. I added plastic cowboy and Indian figures which I would use in battle as the 3 of us played war from our corner seats of the sandbox. We'd build up sand berms and station our army soldiers, cowboys and Indians behind them. Small rocks would serve as rockets as we would throw them at the approaching enemy. Then it happened. It was a hot summer day in July. Joey, Billy and I met at the sandbox after lunch as we did almost every day that summer. I was sitting on my corner seat and the boys were sitting Indian style in the sand playing with their Tonka trucks. I can remember that Joey was wearing his new red sneakers that his mother had told him to take them off before entering the sandbox. Clearly, he did not listen. We saw a subtle swirling motion in the sand, right dead center of the sandbox. We all stopped playing and looked at the bizarre motion. Almost like a small sinkhole was forming. Then suddenly, a small hand emerged from the sand with granules of sand cascading down off its fingers. The hand was the size of a child's hand, protruding up maybe 3 inches past the wrist. The hand slowly spun around like a periscope on a submarine, as if searching its new environment on the surface. Collectively, the 3 of us screamed and jumped out of the sandbox. No words were spoken. The hand was scaly, dry with skin that seemed ancient, featuring matte purple and gray resembling bruising. The small childlike fingernails were long and pointed, dark and dirty. The hand briefly felt around within its reach. Finding nothing, the hand slipped back down to its subterranean home. We stood there silently, as if reacting to a starter's pistol. We instantly ran in different directions to our homes. Predictably, our parents did not believe our story. Joey's mom was more focused on why his brand new red sneakers were so dirty, and Billy's dad scolded him for reading too many Monsters magazines. My father calmly walked out to the sandbox with me to show me it was either my imagination or a story that I made up with my friends. We stood outside the sandbox for 10 minutes to prove to me that there was no hand rising out of the sand. I bet it must have been mid-August when we decided it was safe to step inside the sandbox. Prior to that, we spent considerable time standing outside the sandbox waiting for the hand to reappear. It did not. Joey, the rebel, was first to set foot in the sand. Still wearing his red sneakers, clearly ignoring his mother's rule. I remember he walked around the sandbox, bravely kicking up the sand, trying to conjure up the sand hand monster. After those antics, we all deemed it a safe place to play. It might have been 2 weeks later when we saw the sand swirling in the middle of the sandbox. This time, each of us moved to our corner seats to watch what emerged. The same dry and calloused child's hand popped up. It remained still above the surface, only slightly moving its dirt-caked fingers as if testing the air. We sat and remained silent. Somehow, we knew, if we ran home to tell our parents, the hand would disappear. Joey, the thrill-seeker, picked up a small rock and threw it near the hand. The hand must have picked up on the faint vibrations of the stone hitting the sand and immediately went for it. The hand picked up the stone and disappeared below with it. We waited perhaps 10 minutes. This time with our butts sideways on the sandbox seat, as we had swiveled so our feet were on the outside of the sandbox. The hand returned with something in its closed grip. I thought that maybe it was returning the stone that Joey threw. The closed fist opened up and dropped a shiny, polished black stone. The hand slipped back down. We waited another 5 minutes, then Joey, who else right, unlaced and removed his sneakers and lightly tiptoed to the center of the sandbox in his socks to retrieve the gem. I can recall he immediately said it felt warm. He passed it around and it did, indeed, radiate heat. Joey eventually kept the gem in his bedroom. This stone-gem exchange continued for the next few weeks as we started another school year in September of 1968. We would throw or leave different stones, wood pieces or branches from shrubs. In return, we would get back polished gems, ragged stones, and even porous coral-like rocks. As I look back now, that hand reminded me of a small version of Thing from the series The Addams Family. Then one day, Billy threw a dog's rubber play ball at the hand in the sand. It bounced and rolled near the hand, coming to a complete stop. Again, the hand reacted to the light vibration in the sand and found the ball. It grabbed it, squeezed it, which resulted in squeaky sounds from the dog toy. We all laughed at this spectacle. With rubber ball in hand, our sandhand friend submerged back into its underground home. School started up again in early September, so our sandbox play was hindered by school hours and a big uptick in assigned homework now that we were in the 3rd grade. We would still gather in the sandbox after dinner and on the weekends. We never told our parents about our new friend. It was our secret. We didn't even tell our classmates at school. One Saturday morning, we met at the sandbox. This time, ever-curious Joey brought with him an old clothesline rope that might have spanned 80 feet. When we stepped into the sandbox, we intentionally dug and made noises to attract the hand to the surface. Once the hand appeared, Joey slung one end of the rope toward the middle of the sandbox, where it grazed the gray fingers of the hand. The hand grabbed the rope, rolled it between its fingers and thumb, feeling its texture, then grasped the rope in its fist and lowered itself below as Joey hung onto the other end of the clothesline rope. Slowly, methodically, the rope paid out its length. Billy and I sat and watched in utter captivation. As the rope came to its end, Joey grabbed it tight and wrapped it around his closed fist and then braced his feet. The rope leading to the sand abruptly grew taut. I remember Joey was fighting the pull and asking us to help. Billy and I remained frozen on our bench seats. Then the rope ripped out of Joey's clenched hand, leaving horrible rope burns. We looked at each other in shock, and without saying a word, we collectively knew to never do that again. I believe it was late September when we started feeding our handy friend. It started with vegetables, then candy, then eventually leftover meat from our dinners, which we would secretly hide in our pockets at the dinner table while our parents weren't looking. We would toss the food, which of course would get sandy, and the small hand eagerly would grab the food item, squeeze it and feel its texture, then disappear with it. We actually joked one day that the hand would take a piece of meat, descend with it, then reappear with a thumbs up sign. We laughed so hard at that. It just seemed so harmless at the time. Then probably a week later we were shocked to see a second hand rise up out of the sand alongside the small hand that had become our friend. This new hand was ghostly gray pale, aged with cuts, scrapes and blisters, and displayed freakishly large knuckles. Its long bony fingers stretched high above the sand. We assumed this new hand was a parent to the smaller hand. After getting over our initial creepy shock, we continued our play with exchanging balls, toys and food. The larger hand brought up larger stones for its gift to us. The gifts turned grisly as it brought up from its depths bones, animal bones. With the season turning into a chilling October, we slowed down on our sandbox playtime, which meant no more exchanging gifts. This also meant no more table scraps to feed the sand hands. Then one day in mid-October, our family cat, Corky, disappeared. He was an outdoor cat that came home just after dinner time every night after a day's worth of hunting and exploring its surrounding kingdom. On the second day of Corky not returning, my father walked behind our garage, where our property ended and a deep forest began. He spent hours looking and calling out for Corky. Days went by and my mother said that maybe Corky got lost in the woods. She reminded me that he was 12 years old and it might have been his time. I was deeply saddened and can remember petitioning for a new kitten. Weeks later, I soon forgot all about a new kitten after a mysterious tragedy befell our neighborhood. Then, probably a week or so later, I was playing hopscotch on the driveway pavement in our backyard with other friends. I saw our neighbor, Miss Blankenberg, an elderly woman forever wearing her housecoat, in her backyard calling out for her cat. She was calling its name. I think it was Molly. She was also making that usual mouth, tongue-clicking sound that most cats seem to respond to. She walked to the fence and asked us if we have seen her cat. None of us did. Again, at the time, it meant nothing to me. Just another runaway cat. This is where my story spirals into unspeakable horrifying detail. One day in late October, just days before Halloween, a warm front rolled through Oklahoma. The weather was sunny and fair with temperatures in the 70s. After school, Joey and Billy came over to ask my mother if I could come out to play. But I was home with a cold that day and did not go to school. I fought hard with my mother, telling her I felt better, but she did not relent. She told the boys no and ordered me back to bed. About 2 or 3 hours later, it was now dark outside. My parents received phone calls from both Joey's and Billy's parents. Their sons have not come home. 30 minutes later, I saw flashing lights roll by my bedroom window. I saw one cop car pull into Billy's driveway 2 houses away, and I saw a second cop car heading toward Joey's house down the end of my street. I can remember my parents bringing me down to the kitchen to talk to a police officer. Joey and Billy were missing. Then over the next few weeks our street was filled with police cars and news crews. There were search party teams being assembled on my street to search specified quadrants of the woods behind our garage. Missing person flyers were handed out and posted throughout Stillwater. I can recall seeing a stack of papers sitting face down on our kitchen table. I turned them over to see that my best friends were pictured on them with a physical description of each. That's when reality hit me. I remember running upstairs to my bedroom and laying on my bed crying. Kitchen conversations that I overheard from the top of the stairs were that the boys may have gotten lost in the woods or possibly an abduction. At 8 years old, I was confused as to what that meant. Weeks went by as the police and volunteers scoured the woods behind our house without finding one clue as to their disappearance. Upon winter's arrival, the authorities called off the searches. Joey and Billy simply vanished. I still couldn't make the connection between the cats and my friends disappearing and the sandbox. 2 empty desks in my 3rd grade class served as a daily reminder that my best friends were really gone. Spring of 1969 came fast to Stillwater. Early April showers gave way to pleasant temps in the 70s. My father, who had covered the sandbox with plywood for the winter, removed the seasonal covering in hopes that I might want to invite new friends to come over and play. I finally found the courage to walk out to the sandbox. Not so much to play but to maybe think of Joey and Billy one last time in memoriam. I approached the sandbox and saw one of Joey's red sneakers lying in the sand in the middle of the sandbox. Dried maroon blood was drizzled across the white laces. That sneaker was not there when my dad removed the cover, and it certainly was not there when investigators searched our property for evidence. It was placed there for me to see. I stood there in a near catatonic state, ready to run and tell my dad that the sand people grabbed the boys. As I was about to turn, a large, pale gangly hand surfaced and wrapped its bony fingers around the sneaker and slowly pulled it under for me to see. That was the last time I looked at that sandbox. My father eventually covered it up permanently with plywood. The nightmares started soon thereafter and have plagued me even now on occasion as a grown adult. Now, my dream always starts in my current home with me walking from my bed to the kitchen. There is sand scattered all over the floor, it sticks to my feet. I continue walking into our living room and I see plastic shovels, pails and a few Tonka trucks. One Tonka dump truck has a load of mysterious stones and gems in its bucket. A red sneaker dangled from a hook at the top of a crane on another Tonka truck. As the dream continued, I would find myself outside in the backyard of my childhood house on Huckleberry Lane. I continue walking toward the back of the garage where the sandbox sat. It is dusk. I step into the sandbox with my bare feet and see a swirling motion in the middle of the sandbox. I get down on my hands and knees and crawl toward it. Suddenly, a skeletal hand with shreds of gray decayed flesh hanging off it grabs my arm and starts pulling me down. I resist. I scream. I cry out for my father, but nobody hears me as I get pulled down into the sinkhole. My throat and mouth get clogged with dry, gritty sand while my nostrils get plugged up. I begin to suffocate. I then fall into a dark subterranean cavern where I see the chewed and decayed bodies of Joey and Billy. But they're not dead. They are sitting upright playing with their Tonka trucks in blood-soaked sand. They look up at me with hollowed-out eye sockets and smile. Garbled, raspy voices come out of their toothless mouths saying in unison, "Hello Betsy. Wanna play?" I then bolt upright in bed, gasping for a breath that I feel I haven't had in over 2 minutes. My husband wakes up and comforts me. He's well aware of these night terrors and thinks it's just haunting memories of the disappearances of my childhood friends, Joey and Billy. He knows nothing of the sandbox. Shortly after my recent diagnosis, I took the 2-hour drive to Stillwater. Back to my neighborhood, my street, my house. It was mid-morning as I pulled into the driveway and noticed there did not appear to be anybody home. My childhood house looked different with a new deck built off the back and a different exterior color. I looked up at my second-story bedroom window and thought of the terrors and secrets I kept within those walls for so many years. I pulled up to the 2-car detached garage and parked my car. My heart was racing. I felt nauseous, and my throat went dry. I walked around the garage toward the back. One of the previous owners had removed the sandbox and paved over the area for extra parking space. I walked over the pavement to where I remembered the sandbox was. I stood above it and looked down at the pavement and wondered what's really down there. Below the pavement, the sand, the dirt was perhaps another world. I stood there and thought of what really happened to Joey and Billy. I wondered what if I didn't have a cold on that fateful day. Tears filled my eyes, blurring my vision. I then thought of other sandboxes that children play in and wondered how many other missing children are out there. When I was 10 years old, my brother came home to die on a frigid day in January. Purple lesions ravaged the skin that barely covered his bones. He looked an awful lot like a skeleton, unlike the friendly visitor I had come to know over my short lifetime. My brother Tobias was many years older than me, so I didn't have much of a relationship with him. Still, He made a point to take the train home to New Haven for the holidays, filling our living room with plenty of gifts. One evening, he bought Mom the Fendi baguette she always wanted to show off to her friends at the Junior Women's Club. For my dad's gift, he purchased the George Foreman grill, and all his coworkers at the office buzzed about it. For me, he bought a creepy crawler's oven with liquid and mold containers. The last time he came home, I was excited to show him all the bugs and monsters I made. "You better not," my mom said solemnly when I came home from school one day. My arms were filled with the new batch of miniature reptiles and amphibians I had created. They were a big hit at recess, and I knew Tobias would love them. "He's super tired, honey." I thought they would cheer Toby up. She shook her head and sobbed, drawing a handkerchief to her face. "Honey, we talked about this. Toby is very sick. He won't be able to hear you now." My mom sobbed loudly as my dad slung an arm around her, directing her down the hallway. "Devin, your grandparents are in the living room. Why don't you join them?" These words caused my mom to weep even louder for some reason as my dad ushered her away. As they reached the living room, I heard the faint words of the live-in hospice nurse that it wouldn't be long now, and something about hearing the death rattle. When the sobs faded and the conversation died down, I turned the knob to his room as quietly as I could. Standing in the doorway, my heart fluttered. My brother not only looked like a skeleton with his frail exterior and dissolving skin, but like one of the gray aliens I made in my creepy crawler's oven a couple of weeks ago. Unlike the alien, however, he had several tubes attached to him that were hooked up to boxy beeping machines. His body looked so thin that I swear it started to fade into the sheets of his bed. "Toby?" I said hoarsely. I waited a few minutes before I shouted his name. "Toby." Minutes passed before his purple lips quivered and let out an audible groan that dragged on for several seconds. After the groan ended, 6 booming words escaped his lips: "Look for me on the walls." A longer groan ensued, these words followed by a long beep from the machine. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as the nurse, my parents, and grandparents rushed into the room. I don't remember much except for shuffling feet, screams, and my father whisking me out of the room and closing the door in my face. The adults were in the room for several minutes before my grandmother finally left with her head cast down. She threw her doughy arms around me and said, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Your brother's gone to heaven with the angels," as the other adults came out of the room one by one to hug me, apologize, and sob into my small body. I wondered if I should be crying too. I supposed I loved my brother, but I didn't know him well. To me, he was just that friendly visitor who bought me gifts and read me stories. He popped in and out of my life like some magical elf that appeared only for holidays and disappeared like Santa up the chimney or Frosty the Snowman on a sunny day. I put my hands over my eyes and pretended to cry with them. After a while, I asked if it was okay to go up to my room. My parents permitted me. At once, I hurried up the stairs and slammed the door behind me. For hours, I plopped onto my dinosaur bed sheets and stared at the walls. I stared at the walls for so long that I thought my eyes would bleed. The walls of my room were sponge-painted blue, covered in posters of my favorite baseball players and movies. The shapes on my walls were unmoving. As my eyes drew tears and I yawned, I started to drift off to sleep. My room didn't have any windows, so I couldn't tell whether it was nighttime or not. But I supposed night was nearing by the increasing shadows in the room. Something was strange about these shadows though. They weren't the typical black or gray, but shades of green. I blinked as green circles danced around my walls like a stage spotlight. "Are you awake, Devi boy?" A hollow voice echoed. "It's time to wake up, Devi boy." "Huh?" I said, rubbing my eyes. Who are you?" "You know who, silly. I don't have much time." I blinked twice and the green circles faded together. All at once, the circles morphed into the shape of a human. The shape looked a little under 6 feet tall, perhaps taller, its figure reaching the brim of the ceiling. "Toby? Toby, is that you? Who else? Devi boy?" The figure let out a bellowing laugh and stretched atop the ceiling, twisting around the fan in almost a rhythmic pattern. "But I thought you were dead?" The figure unleashed another bellowing laugh, this time twisting onto the carpeted floor, its green glow matching the soda I spilled the previous day. "I thought I would die too, Devi boy, but it's the most unusual thing. You don't go to heaven or hell like we learned in church. Don't tell mom and dad though. Especially not grandma. I won't, I said, scratching my head. But Toby, if you're not dead, what are you hiding? The figure's voice changed from a bellowing pitch to a dull whisper. What do you mean? You must swear not to tell anyone. I swear, Toby, I swear, people don't die, the figure whispered, draining from the carpets back to a small circle on my wall. They hide. From what? I don't know yet, the figure said, its voice now trembling. I just know that we're hiding. We're all hiding. As the figure spoke these words, I saw dozens of green circles bouncing around my walls. They were varying shades of green. Some spoke in whispers like my brother. Others spoke in gibberish that sounded like different languages. I shoved my thumbs into my ear canals as the sounds grew louder and more varied. I jammed my eyelids shut as the lights flickered and burned into my retinas. As I screamed, I heard my brother's voice once more. People don't die. They hide. Debbie, they hide and they must never be found. I screamed so loud that my cat Jasper hollered from the other room. I screamed so loud that my mom, dad, grandparents, and even the live-in nurse hurried upstairs and forced their way into my room. It's okay, honey, my mom said, pulling me into her bosom. It's okay, sweetheart. We're all so sad. As the others crowded around me, I continued to scream. Though the sounds had disappeared, I still heard my brother's voice loud and clear. People don't die. They hide. As the days faded into weeks and months, I saw the green circles everywhere, bouncing about the side of buildings, circling the screens of the downtown movie theater, and even on the fence of my backyard. Sometimes, the circles morphed into the shapes of humans. Other times they looked like mere reflections. One time during a sleepover, I swore I even saw the circles morph into the shapes of falling bats on the outsides of my tent. I tried not to scream when I saw them. After a while, I tried not to look. When I didn't look, however, I heard their whispers, which usually amounted to nothing but gibberish. As the months faded into years, I checked myself into therapy. The only chance I had to stop seeing the circles, to stop hearing the awful, muffled voices. As a college student, my campus therapist surmised that the shapes and whispers were my way of coping with loss and grief. He assured me that people truly did die and even took me to the local morgue, which his cousin owned, to show me what a corpse looked like. I admitted that I had never seen my brother's corpse when he died. Seeing the corpses of an old woman and a man as skinny as my brother made me realize how natural death was a part of life. I kept in touch with my therapist after college, and with each passing day, I began to hear the voices even less. For the first time in forever, I could appreciate the sounds of the outdoors that I had taken for granted. Even the menial ones like a gust of wind or a child screaming on the playground. For the first time in forever, I could appreciate the laughter of Julia, the girl I took on a first date at the local Starbucks. I loved the sound of her laughter. The sounds of our laughter as we engaged in the silliest conversations. Throughout my life, I heard many wonderful sounds like church bells on my wedding day or the sound of my son Jack crying in my arms. I fell in love with the lights and sounds of my life until the day I started to cough profusely. My wife had taken Jack to daycare as I sat in my home office, typing a draft of my latest article. I felt the urge to cough. A large, bulging urge rising from my chest. As much as I tried to ignore it, I finally unleashed the cough. A cough so powerful that I doubled over onto my desk, spilling blood onto the keyboard. I began to shiver as the blood dripped from my mouth onto the keys and all over the floor. I scrambled to find my cell phone and dial 911 as I continued to convulse blood and cry. After I had emptied all of the contents of blood from my stomach, I collapsed onto the floor with the receiver by my ear. 911, what's your emergency? Hello? With what little strength I had left, I pushed my body across the floor to the phone. I threw up a lot of blood. I said weakly, I'm sorry about that, sir. The dispatcher said. Many moments passed before she spoke again. Hello? Are you there, sir? The dispatcher said, her voice suddenly a lot lower and more muffled. You better start thinking about a good place to hide. As the voice began to cackle, a swarm of green circles danced around my body.